Hello and greetings, my fellow Westorians. I'm Aziz, with me is Ashea, and this is Valar Rereadis, where we look for the foreshadowing we missed, new depth in the world building, a better understanding of the plot lines, greater familiarity with the characters, and more fun than you can fit in all 7 hells. It's been a while since I pointed out our spoiler warning, so let's go ahead and drop that now. We basically are covering everything or using everything. Interviews, Game of Thrones TV, books, everything. I know some people don't want us to use the TV show, but a lot more people out there do want us to use the TV show. And, well, I can't unlearn what I've learned from the TV show, so it's hard to compartmentalize like that. So
yeah, I mean, if we tried to do that, things would be let slip. We would be influenced. It wouldn't be what these people want.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Once it's out there, it's out there. I feel for people who have avoided the TV show and have managed to stay unspoiled. That is a challenge. And for where we're sitting, it's not just a challenge, it's basically impossible. So we appreciate everyone who supports the show and keeps us running. Look to patreon.com to find out how to join and become a supporter. We have things like early episodes, shout-outs, and access to scripts, among other things. So go to patreon.com/History of Westeros to find out more. Probably the most valuable thing is the bonus content. We do some extra stuff for Valar Rereadis, Where Are They Now episodes, as well as some Aziz versus Chapter episodes that we've done, and a Gogasas bonus episode, some panels from past conventions that we didn't publish, things like that. Lots of stuff. Too much for me to list. But that's it for the announcements. Let's get right to it. This time, we have Tyrion 1, the gang makes Tyrion hand, aka the one where Varys riddles.
Bran 1, the one with the first wolf dreams, aka the gang plays Lord of the Crossing.
Arya 2, the gang meets Jaqen Hagar, aka the one where the gold cloaks want Gendry.
Jon 1, the gang hunts for maps, aka the one where Jeor compares Jon to Aemon.
Catelyn 1, the one where Robb sends Theon home, aka the gang gets bad news about the Riverlands.
And Tyrion 2, the gang sends Slynt to the wall, aka the one where Varys answers his riddle.
Right on. Yeah, some good ones today. A lot more first chapters, 4 of them. 4 first chapters and 2 second chapters. A couple more first chapters still to go. By next week, we'll have gotten through them all. There's still Davos and Theon to go, as well as Daenerys. But let's go to Tyrion 1. We'll go right to the first line. Quote,
"In the chilly white raiment of the Kingsguard, Ser Mandon Moore looked like a corpse in a shroud."
So how perfect is it that Mandon Moore is the one keeping Tyrion from the small council room? That he's yet another example of the Kingsguard getting a description like the dead, and that we get this line, a nod to his own death. Quote,
Jaime had once told him that Moore was the most dangerous of the Kingsguard, excepting himself. Always, because his face gave no hint as what he might do next.
Well, good for Tyrion for taking that lesson to heart. Let's look ahead a bit here to when Tyrion, newly made hand, gets his hint from Mandon's hand. Quote,
"There on the deck of the next ship, across a widening gulf of black water, stood Ser Mandon Moore, a hand extended. Yellow and green fire shone against the white of his armor, and his lobstered gauntlet was sticky with blood. But Tyrion reached for it all the same, wishing his arms were longer. It was only at the very last, as their fingers brushed across the gap, that something niggled at him. Ser Mandon was holding out his left hand. Why?"
His face gave no hint, but his hand, well, it gave all the clues Tyrion needed. That's Tyrion 14 in this book, and it's more fun to point these connections out ahead of time than it is to see them in retrospect, if you ask me. Of course, we can't get them all. Sometimes we'll have to point them out in retrospect, but when we catch them ahead of time, well, that's fun, because then you get to see it coming. And that's better than seeing it as after it's passed. So Cersei's greeting for Tyrion is familiar. We just heard this, quote,
"You," his Cersei said in a tone that was equal part...
You said you, his Cersei said.
"You," his sister Cersei said in a tone that was equal parts disbelief and distaste. "I can see where Joffrey learned his courtesies."
Yeah, that's basically what Joffrey said when Tyrion rolled up in Sansa 1. You. So they both say you to Tyrion. But to remind us that Robert did have an effect on Joffrey, Tyrion notes that his nephew doesn't attend council meetings any more than his fake father did. So we have that going. Speaking of the more things change, the more they stay the same, someone is yelling at Slynt for not keeping order. This time it's Cersei, who was not on the small council before, but has taken over. Well, until Tyrion shows up. Now she has to share, but expects him to be below her. I believe it was Renly who complained to Slynt, well, if you can't keep order, then we'll find someone else who can. Yeah, you know, we don't like Slynt, but it's kind of a real world thing to hear an authority tell another authority that, you know, if you're not doing your job, we'll find someone else who can. And what they're really meaning is we'll find someone who is going to be brutal, so we don't have to hear about this. Excuse me. So before Tyrion and Cersei speak alone, there's some banter with the rest of the council. Tyrion wants to have a reckoning over the dagger with Littlefinger, so he thinks. But as we know, that actually hasn't ever happened. He hasn't gotten his chance. He hasn't gotten his revenge. Maybe he never will. Now here's a line that comes up that stands out. It comes when Littlefinger and Tyrion are discussing how many hands have died in recent memory. Quote,
Aerys Targaryen's last hand was killed during the sack of King's Landing, though I doubt he'd had time to settle into the tower. He was only hand for a fortnight. The one before him was burned to death, and before them came 2 others who died landless and penniless in exile, and counted themselves lucky.
Right on. So if we do a little history here, which we do love to do, Rossart the Pyromancer was the fortnight hand. Carlton Chelstead was burned to death for standing up to the king regarding wildfire and King's Landing, all that. So of course Rossart replaced him and was killed in turn by Jaime. That leaves the other 2. Both landless and penniless in exile, you say? Not so fast. John Connington is one of those, and he's of course very much alive, well, very much dying to grayscale, but he's not penniless. The other is Owen Merryweather, whose descendants eventually had some of his lands and titles restored, one of whom his grandson, Lord Orton Merryweather, is hand to Tommen very briefly. He runs off when Cersei is jailed by the High Sparrow, so he's still out there. That's the grandson of the other landless, penniless, exiled hand under Aerys. And that Littlefinger Tyrion conversation ends like this, quote,
I believe my Lord Father was the last hand to depart King's Landing with his name, properties, and parts all intact.
Fascinating, said Littlefinger, and all the more reason I'd sooner bed down in the dungeon. Well, of course, Tywin will return his hand and die doing it, and that will come while Tyrion is released from bedding down in the dungeon. Well, yeah. To all this, Cersei says, quote,
I hope Father did not send you all this way to plague us with history lessons, his sister said when they were alone.
Ahem, how rude. No history lessons. That's, I don't agree with you, Cersei. However, there are history lessons for us, well, recent ones anyway. Cersei says she doesn't know who killed Jon Arryn while admitting her role in taking out Robert, which, well, yeah. That's actually quite convincing by itself. Why would she lie about that to Tyrion? She isn't. First-time readers can catch it there, actually, because she tells everything else she knows. Why would she lie about this? Tyrion points out she knows about Cersei and Jaime. Ooh, yeah, okay. Now, Cersei confirms how important Sansa's snitching turned out to be and admits she didn't realize how stupid sending away Barristan would be. And it's easy to dismiss that she just overlooked that. But she mentions that it was Varys' idea. And we know with 110% certainty that Varys did not overlook the optics of dismissing Sir Barristan. Cersei may have overlooked that. Varys definitely did not. Especially given we know where Barristan ends up, which is in the employ of Illyrio, meaning Varys and Illyrio. Until, he swears to Dany, of course. Then he's in the employ of Dany. I've said before that George R. Martin gives us the answer before he gives us the riddle. I've said that more times than I can count. In this case, when he's literally giving us a riddle, it's not the case. The answer comes later, though arguably we have everything we need to know to answer it now. Now, of course, I'm talking about Varys' riddle. And before George actually gives us the moment with Varys' riddle, he gives us examples of the concept. So he's kind of giving us the answer before he gives us the riddle. A little from column A, a little from column B. The chapter begins with Tyrion thinking on how he cannot allow Sir Mandon to question his authority, right? It's where power lies. And when Cersei claims her authority is above even Tywin's, Tyrion points out that recurring lesson we know well, quote, I am Joffrey's regent, and I sent him a royal command.
And he ignored you, Tyrion pointed out. He has quite a large army. He can do that. Nor is he the first. Is he?
Indeed, he's not. Lots of people are ignoring Cersei's royal commands, particularly the ones rising for the other kings. Of course, they'd not obey Cersei's royal commands. No, I'm following Renly. Joff himself doesn't obey either. Cersei relays to Tyrion that the plan was to let Eddard take the Black, just as we're told in Arya 1 by Yoren, who heard it from Varys, which we also learn in this chapter. Tyrion reminds Cersei of the importance of keeping Sansa alive and unharmed. Oops. And we saw the thing that started Sansa's eventual escape from the Red Keep in Sansa 1 with Dantos, whom Tyrion has not met yet. Now, the Valyrian Sphinxes come up a few times in this chapter, which I think is cool. I always love seeing those Valyrian Sphinxes. And if Tyrion is part Targaryen, well, part dragon, part lion, he's a Sphinx himself. Whether he is a dragon or not, though, he's definitely headed towards Daenerys in the long run, and Varys might be admitting his own loyalties here when talking about the comet. Quote,
In the streets, they call it the Red Messenger, Varys said. They say it comes as a herald before a king, to warn of fire and blood to follow.
Like the Lilac connection and other tidbits surrounding Varys, George is dropping more and more hints about Varys and where his loyalty lies. And his long game involves figuring out who can be of use to him, Varys, that is, and who has to be removed. Luckily for Tyrion, Varys does indeed have a use for him, or at least maybe at this point he's not sure what the long run will be for him and Tyrion, but he's not immediately opposed to him, at least. And of course, what would be a Sphinx without a riddle? Varys' riddle, of course. Here we go, quote.
In a room sit 3 great men, a king, a priest, and a rich man with his gold. Between them stands a sellsword, a little man of common birth and no great mind. Each of the great ones bids him slay the other 2. Do it, says the king, for I am your lawful ruler. Do it, says the priest, for I command you in the names of the gods. Do it, says the rich man, and all this gold shall be yours. So tell me, who lives and who dies?
I love how Varys he asks this question, then he just leaves. He just drops the mic and he's like, okay, bye. I kind of forgotten about that. I remembered it as them just kind of maybe conversing a bit more, talking about other stuff. But I was remembering the second half, which comes in Tyrion 2, this episode, where he comes back and they talk about it later. But yeah, you just like, okay, here's the riddle, see ya. So, but these questions of power dynamics brought to our attention by Varys, they're really all over the series already. But in particular, this chapter. Cersei and Tyrion are jockeying for position right now. Cersei and Tywin are jockeying for position. Cersei is kind of acting like she can tell Tywin what to do, and Tywin's like, yeah, I don't think so. Cersei and Joffrey. I mean, Joffrey is disobeying orders, as we saw there. And he's a peculiar case because of the conundrum of, well, it's already difficult to tell where power lies, but when you have a law about a king being underage, but the king is above the law, and people don't have to obey the king when he's underage, but they fear what he'll do when he comes of age because you disobeyed him when he was underage. It would be hard to disobey Joffrey at 14, knowing that when he's 16, he can come back at you and do whatever he wants, even with even fewer restrictions. So it's really difficult. And I think Joffrey by himself is an interesting case study in this whole riddle of where power lies. And, well, if we look at, of course, Varys is framing this riddle in a way that eliminates a lot of nuance. Of course, who is this sellsword? I mean, obviously that's a huge point. Like, who this person is. What
Why
their
is this
personality
king penniless?
Yeah, good point. Why is the priest penniless? That's not realistic, is it? But of course, that's not the point. It's not supposed to be realistic. It's supposed to make you think. The various swords in service to each of these power players, say Bronn and Sir Mandon, etc., they, if we're using them as the sellsword here in this case, the one being ordered to do different things, well, we see what happens with that. Bronn, at the end of the next chapter, is asking how much it would take to get him to kill a kid. He would do it. Sir Mandon, well, we don't know what he was paid or given or forced on him in order to attack Tyrion during the Battle of the Blackwater, but it was something. And so there's just so much to this. There's so much of the entire series. You could call this riddle a statement on all of A Song of Ice and Fire, minus maybe a few smaller things.
Yeah,
like,
I think
it doesn't.
an episode on sellswords would be interesting, like specifically, specific sellswords. Dario, and where did they find power to lie?
That's
with
true.
The gold.
Yeah. and of course, so much comes from, in terms of power dynamics, the reason they're sellswords in the first place. Like, almost nobody chooses that life unless you're Oberyn Martell.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Like, well, some people are like, yeah, I kind of want to do that, but almost nobody chooses that life. It's
Oberyn's
kind of
like those like Trustafarians. They don't need to be living homeless in the streets, but they just choose to.
Yeah. He just wants to see what it's like.
Yeah.
He knows he can go back to being wealthy whenever he wants.
Yeah.
It's different. So this is an interesting thing. I have more to say on this in Tyrion 2 when Varys comes back to talk to Tyrion about the answer of the riddle. But he, of course, is the master of this. He's a guy that has been one angry sellsword, one ordered sellsword away from being killed. And he's, like he says, he keeps paddling. And that's partly because he does such a good job of playing this game, this power dynamic game of knowing where the shadows are, who's casting them, how to manipulate them, who's manipulating them, and just things like whether they're being manipulated or not. And Varys, as he says, is the best at this, and I kind of have to agree. I don't think anyone else is even close to as good as he is. Littlefinger's a different sort of guy. He's certainly good at it, but he plays it differently. Okay, so yeah, more on that when we get to Tyrion 2. But also, we have other things to say here. Varys denies his own power while simultaneously showing that he has a lot of it by being knowledgeable. He's especially known for having knowledge people aren't supposed to have. Like, how did he hear that? How did he learn this? That's a big refrain for Varys, is him getting information that he, quote, shouldn't be able to get. In this case, he knows where Shay is right away. And it's right away. Let me emphasize just how fast this is. Tyrion enters the small council chambers, tells everyone to leave so he and Cersei can talk alone. Then he and Cersei talk alone. And then Tyrion immediately goes to this inn. And there's Varys with Shay. So he found out where it was and went there in the time it took for Cersei and Tyrion to have their conversation. So, in other words, his people saw Tyrion enter the city immediately. He probably had them waiting. He probably gave orders to look for Tyrion specifically. He probably knew Tyrion was coming. And, well, he knew when Ned arrived, or he knew when Catelyn arrived and all that. So it's just not much of a surprise, but it's a reminder of how damn good he is at this. And Varys and Tyrion kind of have their own little communication without communicating conversation. And it's explained pretty well here. Quote,
when he said, "I was taken by a sudden urge to meet your young lady. What he meant was, you tried to hide her, but I knew where she was and who she was, and here I am." He wondered who had betrayed him. The innkeeper? That boy in the stable? A guard on the gate? Or one of his own?
And that is, by itself, a major theme of Tyrion's arc in A Clash of Kings. Constantly wondering who he can trust, making plans, and Varys knowing about them. Think about one of the main arcs of Tyrion's in this book is him the whole Myrcella plot, where he tells 3 different people 3 different things in order to figure out who he can trust. Now, that doesn't exactly tell him who he can trust, but he knows who he can't trust.
You know, another character that interacts with Myrcella who has to deal with this theme as well is Arianne Martell. Those
Very
second
true.
2 lines could be right out of her chapter if you replaced it with she.
Yeah, you're right. That's very true. Arianne's come up a lot. We talked about her a lot last time. And yeah, it just goes to show. And it's the same sort of thing with her and Ares Oakhart talking about where power lies. And
secrets and honor.
Yeah, it's very similar. It's a really good theme that plays out in a lot of different ways. Couple thoughts from Joe Buckley. As always, check out Scraps and Scrolls. That is the Isle of Faces podcast. Their editions of bonus content, extra stuff from Valar Rereadis, things we don't cover here. He says that as Ned is the central POV storyline in Game of Thrones, so is Tyrion now in Clash of Kings. Both of them are Hand of the King. Yeah, and Tyrion comes at it in a much different way. I agree, he's dealing with a lot of the same people for some of the same reasons. Of course, now we're full on war, where Ned was maybe not trying to stop war, but war hadn't broken out until after he died. So definitely things are different, but we have the same characters, the same location, and this central character being in the same role. Now, I wouldn't call Tyrion the protagonist of this book. I don't think Ned was the protagonist of the first book. If you have to call someone a protagonist, then fine, call it Tyrion, because he has the most chapters, the most ink. But I just don't think that anyone is the protagonist. I don't think that's a box that we need to fit this book into. That's a very standard way to look at novels, but round peg, square hole, I think, is what we're dealing with here. There is not a protagonist of A Song of Ice and Fire, even if you look book to book. But that's just me. I know other people see it differently. Also, Joe suggests that Varys is not just reminding us of his possibly hidden loyalties, less and less hidden. They're not hidden to us, I suppose, but at the time they're hidden. But he's also just talking about fire and blood in the sense of destruction, right? The comet, I think it's Blackfish, in the Catelyn chapter, points out that of all the people who look up at the comet and have this sort of mystical, ominous view of it, Blackfish just looks at it very simply and says, yeah, that means blood. That means war. And he's probably the most right about it. I mean, even if it's just because people are looking at that and thinking it's an omen and thinking it's a religious significance, that's going to fire people up. No pun intended, for once. So yeah, that's really interesting. The comet, of course, continues to hang over everything, and George uses it to sneak in hidden language like that, but also to just talk about the reality of the situation and not the mysticism behind it. Tyrion again reminds himself that Shae is there because of his money, his Lannister wealth. Well, not just Lannister wealth, because he has wealth. It doesn't have to be Lannister wealth particularly. Just wealth in general will do. And George is reminding us of what we learned at the end of Game of Thrones, which is the same concept. It's important to kind of restate some of these important themes because they're going to be even more important going forward. And this also speaks to the power dynamic that is prevalent in this chapter. And again, as I said, throughout all the books, Shae is with Tyrion, but later she'll be kind of forced to switch her loyalties because her life depends on it. That is a luxury that someone like Tyrion has. He can switch, and because of who he is, it doesn't necessarily get him into the same trouble. He has a lot more agency, a lot more power. He has sellswords who will die for him. He has people that will come protect him. He's not just paddling by like Varys. In that, Shae and Varys have something in common, that if someone comes at them with a sword, there may not be anyone to protect them. Right now, Shae has someone protecting her, but it's only because of Tyrion. Tyrion is the whole reason for all of that. And if he's gone, then quite likely all the rest of that is as well.
You know, you said Varys was paddling by.
Yeah.
I think he's swimming by. He's a merman.
That's why he wears this very specific footwear to hide his flippers. Couple of random questions and miscellaneous thoughts from us and y'all. Always good to remember that whenever Tyrion and Cersei discuss in private, in the castle is likely overheard by a little bird or two. Not this time, it wouldn't have been Varys specifically listening in, because as we pointed out, he was on his way to the Broken Anvil to get a look at Shay. Stefan B. from Flick wonders about Varys threatening Tyrion by showing up near Shay, and how their relationship grows over time. He does this kind of threatening, I know where Shay is kind of thing, but over time they get closer and closer, and eventually, maybe it's too much to say Varys recruited Tyrion, because I don't know that he knew how it would go after Tyrion killed his own father. But, and we certainly didn't know that Jaime would threaten Varys to make Tyrion be let go. So I think, if we're being honest, Varys expected Tyrion to die. But he does like Tyrion. It's just that Varys is, well, he's very serious about his goals, and he's not very, he doesn't really have, what's the word, sympathies for individuals like that. He's just, Tyrion is another tool. He's a tool he might be fond of, and he's a tool that ended up having far more uses than Varys and probably Illyrio originally intended or realized. But that's just part of how Varys and Illyrio operate. They go with the flow. They adjust on the fly. They change their plans as often as they change their shoes, right? Or whatever that line is from the Golden Company. It changes. That fat man who changes his plans as often as I change my... I don't remember what that line is, but you get the point. Joe Berlin wonders what emotions Joffrey felt at his father's death, and if Cersei coached him on that. That's an interesting consideration, that second part. I guess because Joffrey is basically a sociopath, if not some form of psychopath. Probably not a psychopath, but basically he has these pathoses that are, you know, on the twisted side and very unsentimental. That's the word I was thinking of for Varys. Unsentimental. Yes. So Joffrey feeling very little at Robert's death is to be expected, but he may have thought he had to say things about it and, you know, act like he cared. Certainly Jack Gleason made it look like he was caring about Robert on the TV show when he's holding his hand there. But that was it. You know, maybe that was just acting, an actor acting, his character acting. And the idea that Cersei coached Joffrey on how to behave, how to show the realm he cares about his father is interesting. Cersei may have had him downplay that because she's so big on emphasizing the Lannister side of things, but she doesn't want him to be, you know, to come off all like an improper ruler. She understands, at least at some level, the importance of maintaining certain appearances. She obviously is blind to certain optics, but not blind to all of them. So that's a great question, but it's hard to be sure on a specific answer. All right. Bran 1, the one with the first wolf dreams, a.k.a. the gang plays Lord of the Crossing. This is a big one. I think it's between this one and Tyrion 2, I think, are the ones that got me thinking the most and writing the most. There's quite a lot of blood in this one. Foreshadowing of more blood. The Red Wedding, in particular, is foreshadowed quite a bit. Big Walder killing Little Walder is hinted at. And, of course, there's King Bran foreshadowing. That was something we didn't know to look for before, but we do now, and we're seeing it all over the place. Let's start with that, since the chapter itself starts with that. Quote,
Bran preferred the hard stone of the window seat to the comforts of his feather bed and blankets.
Compare that to what we heard back in Eddard 11, quote,
A king should never sit easy, Aegon the Conqueror had said, when he commanded his armorers to forge a great seat from the swords laid down by his enemies.
Of course, this is George using double meanings again. Of course, Bran wants to see the world. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling is no fun. And the window gives him some of that. And of course, he's getting more wolfish. So there's kind of a double of course here. That's on display big time in this chapter, with Bran howling at the moon to the extent that it both frustrates and saddens Maester Luwin. Yeah. Luwin doesn't know what to do. There's another theme that seems like a metaphor for being king. In this chapter, Bran is unhappy and serious while others are playing around him. Quote,
Bran had not heard so much laughing since the night the bloody raven came.
For someone like Doran Martell, a man without use of his legs also, who likes to watch kids play in the water, it brings him peace. For Bran, though, who is of an age with these kids he's watching play. It makes him jealous and bitter. He's too young for this burden, but if a 7-year-old must bear that burden, so be it. I'm quoting George, who said, if a 7-year-old must conquer the world, so be it. Or he said a 12-year-old, but he was probably talking about Bran with the 5-year-old gap included. The Bloody Raven is mentioned twice in this chapter. That's interesting, isn't it? Yes, I think so. You think so, too. As we move on to the crossing game, though, well, here's more King Bran foreshadowing in a bit. He's the authority for the game. He's basically the judge, the guy sitting above and sitting in judgment over it.
Also, we have an episode, Games of Westeros, that came out so long ago. We talk about Lord of the Crossing in there. It's one of Westeros games. That's
very true. We didn't have all the foreshadowing lined up for that one, but we certainly had some of it. Yeah, that's a video only. That was a short one we never actually put up as a podcast. So you'll have to look way back in our catalog to find that one, but it is there. And Bran actually feels he's not just a little jealous and bitter. He's a little aggressive about it. Quote,
"If I had my legs, I'd knock all of them into the water," he thought bitterly. "No one would ever be Lord of the Crossing but me."
Well, seizing power, perhaps. Yeah. The crossing game is also full of, I said...
I just want to say real quick,
sure.
No one would ever be Lord of the Crossing but me. He's going to be forever.
The immortal King
God
Bran.
Ever, yeah.
Declaring his intent to be king forever. That's cool. I didn't think of it that way, but you're right. That's a very valid interpretation. That's cool. Kind of creepy, but very cool. So yeah, the crossing game, like I said, is very full of red wedding foreshadowing, where the whole point of the game is to create a loophole in your promise to be the last one standing, etc. The keyword mayhaps is uttered by Walder twice here in the actual red wedding chapter. So we'll jump a whole book and several chapters ahead to quote it. Here we go.
"When you came down from the north, you wanted crossing and I gave it to you, and you never said mayhaps. But suit yourself. Lead each man across by the hand if you like. It's not to me."
"My lord," Catelyn had almost forgotten, "some food would be most welcome. We have ridden many leagues in the rain."
Walder Frey's mouth moved in and out. "Food, a loaf of bread, a bite of cheese, mayhaps a sausage."
"Some wine to wash it down," Robb said, "and salt." "Bread and salt gives you guessed right, but not if there's a loophole like saying mayhaps." I didn't know that was a loophole in guessed right, but here's where we learned it. No, just kidding. That doesn't make it a loophole, but that is what's being alluded to here. I guess Walder said mayhaps twice because the rule is once, if you say mayhaps once, you get to cross. 2, if you say it twice, you get to kill everyone. So fair is fair. Now look at this line. Quote,
"Before Bran could blink, the black wolf was flying over the plank. There was blood in the water. The Walders were shrieking red murder. Rickon sat in the mud laughing, and Hodor came lumbering in, shouting, 'Hodor! Hodor! Hodor!'"
Red murder, you say. Blood in the water, you say. That's where a lot of the bodies were dumped. That's where Catelyn was dumped. That's where lots of people jumped in. Yeah, red wedding foreshadowing all over the place. Now, this line also looks kind of foreshadowy. Check this out. Quote,
"Little Walder was Lord of the Crossing more often than not."
But it is not. He wins because the game is heavily decided by size, which Little Walder has. Remember, as confusing as it is, there's already so many Walders. Little Walder is bigger than Big Walder, but younger by a little bit. Later, he will be deader than his cousin. And it's probably his cousin, Big Walder, who kills him. Big Walder has the more common weaselly Frey look, while Little Walder is the large, stout-sized Frey.
Yeah, because George wanted to make it confusing.
Yeah, extra confusing. Well, I'm not going to go cheering the death of a young man, especially at the hands of another young man. Manderley had the right of it. He'd grow up to be a Frey. And this is one of the bad Freys, which most of them are, but there's a few good ones. So to clear things up a little bit here, the bigger Freys are apparently, as we've seen, the dim and violent types. Merritt Frey, Hostine Frey, the ones that have Crakehall heritage, apparently. Fat Walda is Little Walder's sister. Her marriage to the Boltons is why that branch of the family comes north to join their close ancestor, Little Walder, right? Notice that I've named a bunch of characters who go north. Well, a lot of them do. Merritt Frey does not, because, of course, he's killed before he could do that. But Hostine goes north, and, of course, Fat Walder goes north, and Little Walder's already there. So
it's you can see Fat Walda and Little Walder, who is big. They come from the large Freys.
Yeah, these different little branches of the Freys family kind of stick together. So they all go up there to join Little Walder and Fat Walder and all that, only for him to be probably kinslayed. But Big Walder is obviously bad news too. I mean, he killed his own cousin, so yeah, that's not good. Despite the uphill battle, he might actually be a candidate for taking the twins himself. In this chapter, they argue about that, and it kind of seems really far-fetched for either of them to ever be Lord of the Crossing, because of just, there's so many Freys in front of him. But if something like what we see happens in the show, a lot of Freys dying all at once. Now, in the show, it seemed to be literally all of them. Now, in the books, it's not going to be literally all of them, but it might be a lot of them. And if a lot of Freys are killed in all one fell sweep, then you might actually have a situation where there's all of a sudden very few Freys left. And then, yeah, maybe Big Walder could take over, if not Black Walder or one of these others. So, yeah, it's not actually so far out of the realm of possibility. So Hostine and so many of these others are doomed, especially Hostine, because he's in the north, about to fall into an ice lake or something. But no one's going to be up there to execute young Big Walder, and he does say that he's going to rule his family seat one day, quote.
And neither of us will ever hold the twins, stupid.
I will, Big Walder declared. And he displays an intimate knowledge of the line of succession. Little Walder is bigger and ahead of him in the succession, so his death makes sense from that perspective. Crossing one out of 50 more names off the list. He'll need Little Walder's branch heavily pruned to get there. It's a lot of... He's kind of a gardener, too. An evil, dirty gardener. And, a major one of these, I keep talking about Hostine. The crossing game may foreshadow his fate as well. This is one that's kind of new to me. I hadn't thought of this before. This reread, I caught it. Losers of the crossing game, what happens to them? They fall into the water. Well, what is Stannis luring a large Frey army onto an ice lake to do to them? Probably so that they fall into the water. There you go. That's pretty cool. Nice little parallel there. So crowns and lordships abound in this one. Not just Bran's kingly foreshadowing and the top spot at the twins, but we also have this, quote.
Ser Roderick decreed that they would share Jon Snow's old bedchamber, since Jon was in the Night's Watch and never coming back. Bran hated that. It made him feel as if the Freys were trying to steal Jon's place.
This is kind of inverse George laughing. He's making kind of a hidden joke here. Robb eventually names Jon his heir, probably. And prior to naming Jon his heir, he was set to marry a Frey, which would have meant his heirs would have been Freys. So instead, he married Jane Westerling and named Jon his heir. So this is the joke, that Bran is mad that these Freys are taking Jon's place, but Jon took the Frey's place as Robb's heir. So, and of course, Robb is killed and all that. So it's kind of all water under the bridge, so to speak. But yeah. So speaking of people not getting what they want, just like Cersei giving out commands that no one's following, Bran complains that he commanded the Walders be sent home. But yeah, that's not happening. But it's kind of a funny thing to see that Cersei and Bran have something in common. It's a rarity. As we mentioned by way of our name for this chapter, Bran's warging begins to be a thing here in this here chapter. He's had prophetic dreams already, but this is the first time he's aware that he's seeing through Summer's eyes. Bran asks Luwin three dream questions right after Luwin says something that sounds like Bravosi wisdom. It's like Valar Snoozaris? Anyway, quote, "All men must sleep, Bran, even princes."
When I sleep, I turn into a wolf. Bran turned his face away and looked back out into the night. Do wolves dream?
All creatures dream, I think, yet not as men do. So that's question one, and we see the wolf dreams this chapter. Bran in Summer's head, he hasn't taken control yet, So I think it's fair to say that the dream is Summer's, not his. At least there's a case to be made. Bran's just kind of watching. And everything is also seen through the wolf's eyes. The way that those lines are written is it's, great gray caves of man rock. That's what Winterfell looks like. And but by the end of those little bits of those couple of paragraphs, he thinks of Winterfell. He's kind of working his way through. It's like he's practicing being in Summer's head and realizing what's going on and slowly finding his footing. So great gray caves of man rock is Summer's thought, but Winterfell is like the sign that Bran has started to figure it out, to kind of understand and to take control. And here comes the second question. Quote,
"Do dead men dream?" Bran asked, thinking of his father. In the dark crypts below Winterfell, a stonemason was chiseling out his father's likeness in granite.
Some say yes, some no, the maester answered. The dead themselves are silent on the matter. Oh, are they? I don't know about that, Lewin. Lewin just keeps saying wrong things. We love the guy, but when it comes to magic, yeah, he is kind of he's like the guy who's just supposed to be wrong. In this series, the dead have a lot to say. To be fair, though, none of the dead characters like Beric nor Cold Hands have actually commented on their dreaming yet that I'm aware of. I looked, couldn't find any examples of Beric or Cold Hands talking about dreaming. Jon, though, maybe we'll get that from Jon eventually. Hopefully. Now, the question of what kind of conscience and perceptions and humanity the Whites have is a big one. Something we've already been talking about. We brought it up with Jafer and Othor, or Jafer Flowers and Othor, and the fact that they knew where certain parts of Castle Black were. They at least had some memory. They knew who was in charge, things like that. So if they have memory, maybe they have dreams. I mean, a lot of modern science, not even modern science, just science for a long time has been connecting memory to dreaming. So there's that. The third question from Bran, quote,
"Do trees dream?"
Trees? No.
"They do," Bran said with sudden certainty. "They dream tree dreams. I dream of a tree sometimes, a werewood, like the one in the Godswood. It calls to me. The wolf dreams are better. I smell things, and sometimes I can taste the blood."
Taste the blood. See, now that really sticks out to me, especially when he's talking about the tree dreams. So compare that line to the last line in Bran's final A Dance with Dragons chapter. Quote,
The woman grabbed the captive by the hair, hooked the sickle round his throat, and slashed. And through the mist of centuries, the broken boy could only watch as the man's feet drummed against the earth. But as his life flowed out of him in a red tide, Brandon Stark could taste the blood.
Yeah. Now, it's a bit of an aside, but he's Brandon Stark as he's flitting through the eons of memory, not Bran, because in that sense, he's kind of all the Brandons at once. But yeah, that's really interesting, huh? So this is George is introducing
so wait,
us. Go ahead.
What you're telling me is he's Bran the Builder?
He might be. And yeah, so there's the dreams are kind of introduced here. George is setting up a lot of dreaming in this book. There's obviously the dreams in Game of Thrones are really important, but they're not as magical. Some of them are. Certainly Bran's dreams are. He has this coma dream, which is super magical. But there's lots of non-magical dreams, like Ned's dreams are not magical at all. He has fever dreams of the Tower of Joy. Those are some of the most important dreams in the entire series, but they're not magical in the slightest. Jon has dreams of the crypts. Maybe those are magical, but I don't think so. I think those are just, him having bad dreams and thinking about his identity. So this is where George is making distinctions. He's showing different types of dreams. He's categorizing them. He's showing, he's kind of explaining some of how skin changing the old gods magic works, even though there's a lot left unsaid, a lot that we kind of have to figure out on our own, a lot that we'll never know. He's at least giving us some way to make sense of it all, as a lot of it's happening at once. Arya is going to have her first wolf dreams. Jon as well. This book is full of that. So it's quite a lot to do. And of course, he mentions the Bloody Raven in this chapter a couple times as a side. And we know that's very likely a source of some of his other dreams. So That's you can see why I think this chapter is perhaps the most important of the batch. It's a kind of becoming a bit of a pattern that the Bran chapters are the ones I keep pointing that to, the ones I have the most to say about. Well, so getting back to this blood thing, though, it looks like Bran can taste the blood in his tree dreams, just like he could taste them in his wolf dreams. He thinks that the tree is calling him, which is perhaps the beginnings of Bloodraven trying to get him to come north. The same general sense that Jaqen has. Magic is overpowering science again here. Not only is Lewin's points constantly overpowered by truths that we've seen. It's not just that we have this sense that Lewin is wrong. We already know he's wrong. Back in the first book, we weren't sure. But by this point, it's very clear that magic is super real and dominating all these chapters that Bran is in, dominating his dreams, and Lewin is running out of excuses for it. So, but what I mean by magic overpowering science here is that Bran is given sweet sleep. Or at least it's probably sweet sleep, given how it performs. It's known to give a deep, dreamless sleep, and it knocks him out quickly. Bran finds himself dozing off immediately, but immediately once he is asleep, he's in Summer's skin. Like instantly. So, yeah, good. Sweet sleep not going to do the trick for Bran. Too much green seer power in there for minor drowsy drugs to take over. Now, since this is one of the opening chapters, Bran 1, we of course have to have some comet talk. Osha says, quote,
"Blood and fire, boy, and nothing sweet."
Old Nan has a similar take.
"Dragons," she said, lifting her head and sniffing. She was near blind and could not see the comet, yet she claimed she could smell it. "It be dragons, boy," she insisted.
Yeah, well, you can't say she's wrong. I mean, the comet, as much as we talk about all the different things the comet could mean, what it symbolizes, and the fact that the comet came before the dragons were actually born, well, dragons were just born. So whether we can understand the mechanism for which Old Nan is correct, well, whether we do or not, it doesn't matter. She is correct. And Osha kind of is well. She says blood and fire. We don't really know whether she means it in the supernatural way or if she's kind of like Blackfish where she just says, that's not good. People are going to fight over that. Or some combination of the two. It's not really clear. But the fact that she happens to use the Targaryen words kind of leads me to think that she's kind of on the same take as Old Nan is there. Even though she says blood and fire, not fire and blood. I mean, you know.
So you don't think she's a Targaryen or a Blackfire?
Osha's a hidden Targaryen.
Yeah.
Oh, I never thought about that. No, see, if Osha was a Targaryen, her name would be spelled like Oshae or something like that. So the direwolves, too, are howling at the comet. At least it seems that way. But they've also howled at other things. Bran noted that they've howled every time someone important has gotten hurt or died. And this time he wonders who it is. But I don't think there was anyone in particular this time, unless unless the wolves are, I don't know, they're howling for Mirri Maz Duur. I don't think so. Hard to say who that would be that they're howling for this time. But so it's more of Bran kind of figuring out where he's headed, and he's also just learning about all this. This is just as new for the readers as it is for us at this point. So let's take a few notes from Joe and a few questions from y'all. But first, a quote that Scott pulled. Scott Wortman, one of our mods for the Facebook group, does a fantastic job keeping the discussions going. And in this case, he pulled a great quote. This is in response to Lewin saying that the dead are strangely silent on the matter. Ed thinks otherwise. Quote,
"The dead are likely dull fellows, full of tedious complaints. The ground's too cold. My gravestone should be larger. Why does he get more worms than I do?"
That's really good. Joe has a slightly different take on Old Nan calling the comet dragons. He says 100 different viewpoints on what the comet means, but it's Old Nan of the frozen north that calls out dragons. That's true. That's a great point, because you have, of all the people calling out dragons, it's just her and maybe Osha and maybe Varys, but they're only alluding to dragon-y type stuff. Only Old Nan actually flat out says dragons. And she doesn't say anything else either. She just says dragons. There's no and, or, it's just dragons, period. And no one else, of all the other people who talk about the comet, I'm pretty sure no one else actually says dragons. Besides the people who have the dragons, meaning in Dany's chapter, they're talking about dragons. So we'll not count them. But the other people we've named, like Catelyn and Blackfish and Arys Oakheart and Arya and Gendry, and they're all calling it different things, but only Old Nan says dragons, which is a sign that Old Nan is to be listened to, as if we didn't know that already. So I wonder, this is kind of an off-topic question, but at least it's related to Old Nan. I wonder how many of you think Old Nan is still alive. I think there's a chance. She was taken with all the other female captives to the Dreadfort, which is definitely not the place you want to be. But, as terms of guessing whether or not she's alive, there is a chance.
I mean, I don't think she's going to be one of the women that they're going to abuse as such. She's
true.
old.
They wouldn't be interested in her that way.
They're not going to be sending her off on hunts or doing anything like that, but she is old, so the likelihood of her just dying with, less care and worse conditions.
Yeah, just
possible.
Surviving the walk there might be.
Yeah, just that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but you did give me some hope there, Aziz. I hadn't really thought about the fact that she wouldn't be high on the docket for women to abuse.
Well, and they're just not, luckily for all those women, I mean, not to call them lucky, really, it's kind of silly, but Roose and Ramsay are at Winterfell. So currently there's no Boltons at the Dreadfort. So at least there's that. Of course, there's other awful people there. But there is at least that the Boltons are out and about, not at their castle. We can hope that's a reprieve. We can hope that they never get back to their castle. We can hope that someone stops them. Manderly, Jon Snow, somebody. Now, here's another quote that Joe pulled that might be some King Bran foreshadowing. You got this one ready, Shea?
Mm-hmm.
Quote.
He could not walk, nor climb, nor hunt, nor fight with a wooden sword as once he had, but he could still look.
Yeah, now Joe thinks maybe that's a reference to looking through time. Yeah, he could. Well, he can't. He can't yet, but eventually he'll be able to. That might be what George is kind of tongue-in-cheek suggesting there. That's a good catch. I laughed out loud when reading my ebook copy of this. Every once in a while, there's some strange typo in these ebook copies that are floating around. And at one point, my book says Maybaps instead of Mayhaps. I don't think you get any points for saying Maybaps. Like, you didn't say Mayhaps, you said Maybaps. It doesn't count.
I think my favorite one, though, was that that ebook that someone had. This was years ago that said George R. R. Martin randomly. You remember that, Aziz?
Oh, it's had his name in there?
Yeah, it just had his name in there.
Just like in the middle of the text.
Yeah.
Where? I don't remember where it was.
Here, I'll give you an example right here. Here's one. I will find no help here. I'll start with this one, sorry. I was drunk on you. It had been 10 years since. I never touched a woman until George R. R. Martin, A Feast for Crows. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Once ago, a callow youth had come from Norvos, a big, broad-shouldered boy with a mop of dark hair. That hair was George R. R. Martin, A Feast for Crows. Blah, blah, blah. Go on and on. Anyways, yeah.
That's really good.
Oh, man, they just continue to always crack me up. Okay, on we go.
So here's one that I also hadn't caught before. This was a new catch for me this time around. It's casually mentioned that Rickon showed the Walders where the crypts were, so they could have revealed that location to Ramsay much later, when Ramsay was searching for them. But no one thought of it or didn't care enough. Maybe Walder's just a kid. He didn't think, oh, maybe they're hiding in the crypts. But as we see through Theon's point of view, Mance, aka Abel's girls, are trying to find the crypts in A Dance with Dragons. They're one of the things they asked Theon, and it's mentioned casually that one of the girls dances with little Walder. So I'm guessing they were trying to get it from him because they knew he had been at Winterfell for a while. So he's a likely candidate for someone to know where the crypts are. But apparently that didn't come up. Little Walder either didn't talk about the crypts or etc. That's very interesting. Maybe that'll come up later. Nina caught a little tidbit here as well, something I missed. Lewin tugging at his chain a couple times here during this chapter, or at least once in particular. You can read it as chafing him because his chain is restraining him from seeing the truth here because he's taught to kind of downplay magic or to look for other explanations and he's taken that concept too far because the magic is right here. Magic is real, Lewin, and it's getting realer. And we have sort of the interplay of science and magic here in other ways. The White Raven is in this chapter as well, and the White Raven is kind of like science. The White Raven is, hey, winter is coming. But the comet is also telling us the same thing in a sense. Maybe not winter is coming, but it's telling us something's coming. It is dragons or otherwise. And I really like that interplay of kind of the science's symbolism for the changing of seasons and the comets exemplifying the magical side of that, telling us what's coming as well. There's reasons to mistrust the phrase and Bolton's from the start, but it's pretty vague. Here in this chapter, like I said, this is where the Red Wedding foreshadowing kind of begins, and you should be on the lookout for more of it. There's a lot more of it coming in this book. Think back, though, to when you read this from the first time. We didn't really know how bad the Freys were going to be. We didn't know how bad the Boltons were going to be for sure. Like, Roose Bolton's hardly done anything to this point, and Ramsay Bolton hasn't even been introduced. So thinking of the Boltons like, look out for the Boltons. There's not a whole lot of reason to do that. There's definitely some. Robb is creeped out by the room with skins in it. And Roose is remembered to have suggested slitting Barristan's throat out on the Trident. So there's little hints like that. But it's also pushed back against by him being given command of the host at the Green Fork, and just a lack of other things that we learn later that make it very clear that the Boltons are bad news. And on the Frey side, well, yeah, Little Walder and Big Walder are kind of crappy kids, but they're not like bloody, awful murderers, well, yet. And the Freys haven't done anything terrible yet either. They've just been kind of like, I don't know if I like these guys. So always important to remember where we actually are in terms of the narrative. Things that we know, well, first-time reader doesn't know all these things yet. And that's part of the point, because George is telling things to people a certain way, and we can be aware of that. We can know that George is speaking to first-time readers, but he's also speaking to rereaders, because we know these books were designed to be reread. Esther McGriff shouts out Old Nan and Osha for being right. Adam, that's for sure they are. Tree Girl says Shaggy's extreme frustration and wildness really says a lot about Rickon. Hard for a kid to be in Rickon's spot right now. Yeah, everything, he had this kind of nice, steady day-to-day family life that was just thrown into turmoil, and all of his fears were realized. Everyone's like, no, everything's gonna be fine, Rickon. Everyone's gonna come back, and well, they didn't. People are dying. War is breaking out. And Shaggy Dog being so wild and chewing on iron bars and constantly being angry and stalking around is supposed to be a reflection of what's going on in Rickon's head, and that's tough. It's tough to think about that. It's a lot of little kids out in the real world that have similar situations where they have so much going on around them and they don't know how to process it. Also, shout out Scott Wortman again for paying close attention to the various descriptions of the comet. We catalog a lot of that in our comet episode that we did long ago. And I think it was probably back in like 2014 or something like that.
Yeah, I know. I'm regularly shocked when I look at an episode and I felt like, oh, that wasn't that long ago. And I'm like, oh, damn, that was 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
That's what true. 2014 was. So yeah, it might be a 5-year-old episode, but it's still interesting.
Someone named Ned Stark in the chat points out that Bran takes Jon's place if we go by the show. Yeah, he kind of does. Yeah, Jon, because Jon becomes king first and then kind of steps aside, kneels to Dany, and then Dany dies and Jon's like, I don't want it.
Yeah.
And Bran takes it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. And that also really touches on the whole Maester Aemon parallels with Jon and Bran being kind of like Egg. Right on. Okay, that's it for Bran 1. A beefy, awesome chapter, but we have to say goodbye to it. But we'll be coming back to Bran soon. Arya 2. The gang meets Jaqen Hagar, a.k.a. the one where the gold cloaks want Gendry. I say Gendry and Gendry interchangeably. What do you say?
Usually Gendry. I don't think I ever say Gendry. I do say Sansa and Sansa interchangeably.
Yeah, me too.
And there's other names I do similarly. But no, I never would say Gendry.
Well, here's the first line of this chapter.
They traveled dawn to dusk, past woods and orchards and neatly tended fields, through small villages, crowded market towns, and stout holdfasts.
Now, the sad thing is, so much of this will be destroyed. The crowded market towns won't be so crowded. The neatly tended fields will be neither neat nor tended. The woods and orchards will be, lots of them will be burned and or picked clean. Small villages will be even smaller villages, etc. Stout holdfasts will be not so stout. And one of the next things she notices is that lots of people are headed towards the city and almost no one is headed in their direction. And she wonders about that and gets her answer shortly when told how much devastation they're heading towards. The city provides shelter in times of war. That's part of why so many people were going there. And of course, that's also room for extreme cynicism. A lot of these people are getting in ahead of the rush before the small council gets the cynical idea, thanks to Littlefinger, to charge people a cover to get into the city. Yeah. So we get to see some one of the fun things about these Arya chapters that is later picked up by Brienne, meaning that we have Arya is the kind of the down in the gutters or down in the dust. She's existing with the most unfortunate people, the people with the least agency. She's touring the countryside and seeing the cost of war, seeing what happens to all these common folk. Like I said, again, that's what Brienne gets to do later. And so what we see how the common people act, how they behave, and little things like little small rituals, little customs, like this one. Quote,
A boy called Tarbur tossed a handful of acorns atop Praed's body, so an oak might grow to mark his place.
So it makes me wonder, like, how common is this custom? Is that a normal thing to throw acorns on a grave?
I think it's a great idea. I think it's very nice.
Yeah, it's a really neat way to try to you can't make a gravestone, but there's a chance for a natural gravestone of sorts to appear, a marker. Yeah, it's a neat thought. But it also just touches on the idea that there are spirits in the trees, like the dead green seers in the werewoods. It's kind of like a parallel concept, even though that I'm not suggesting that this guy prayed his spirit is going to grow into this oak tree, but it is a parallel thought. The idea of that is there. Arya hears a lot of rumors and news when they stop for the night, and there are some important bits. Klansmen are about, we know why, thanks Tyrion, and men from various armies in the war. Thanks everyone, I guess. And it's interesting, she hears that people are saying wild things about Robb. Already the rumors about Robb and his wolf are getting a little over the top, riding it into battle. That's a little crazy, not that crazy. Later, you'll hear things like he turns into a wolf or, things like that. So the tales grow over time.
I mean, you hear that about Sansa, too.
Later. Yeah, you're right. That's true. That's very true. Good point. So the stories aren't going to slowly get more accurate as people realize the truth. That's not how rumors work. They gradually get more and more insane and outlandish. And Arya hears about Nymeria. Quote,
Around the God's Eye, the packs have grown bolder than anyone can remember. Sheep, cows, dogs, makes no matter. They kill as they like, and they got no fear of men. It's worth your life to go into those It's worth your life to go into those woods by night.
That's more tales, and no more true than the other.
I heard the same thing from my cousin, and she's not the sort to lie, an old woman said. She says there's this great pack, hundreds of them, man killers. The one that leads them is a she-wolf, a bitch from the seventh hell.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of amazing. Nymeria's already done this. I mean, it's been a bit of time, but not like a lot of time. But hey, the animal kingdom, it's all about strength, and Nymeria just clearly outclasses any other common wolf. So, I mean, she's probably 2 or 3 times the size of any other wolf.
Clearly, she outclasses any other dire wolf, too, because here she is leading packs, and the other ones are doing nothing.
Yeah, they're just hanging out with their owner. They don't have their own. They don't have agency like Nymeria does.
Yes, direwolf agency.
Yeah, Nymeria has an awful lot in common with her namesake. She lands in, she comes from a land of rivers and takes over the new land, the new territory as soon as she's dropped off, because she's so much more badass than everyone else around her.
I thought you were gonna talk about how she comes from the land down under.
I'm a fan of Australia and Australians, but I don't think Nymeria is Australian. So Arya wonders if it's Nymeria, and well, it is. Of course it is. Arya will also later dream of the pack in A Storm of Swords, Arya 1. I think I said her wolf dream started this book, but I guess that's not quite right. Maybe she sort of has some inklings of wolf dream, but the first real one, I guess, might not be until her first A Storm of Swords chapter. Close enough. She dreams of killing some brave companions who were hunting her meaning Arya, not Nymeria. So that's a sign that both it's sort of a clever way of George concealing some identities for us to kind of smile, but also it's a sign that Arya is, Arya later wonders if Nymeria would remember her. Well, this is evidence that Nymeria definitely remembers her. Got your back there, Arya. So thanks to world-building knowledge we gained way after this book was published, the way Jaqen speaks is typical to Lorath. It's considered very uncouth in Lorath to refer to yourself in the first person. So he says, that's why he says things like, a man wants asparagus instead of I want asparagus. You don't say I in Lorath. It's so uncouth. But so Jaqen had already noticed her in the first chapter, and or had already noticed her prior, rather, and now he sees her smack bite her in the face, to which he says, quote,
"A boy has more courage than sense."
Which I don't know that he thinks that's a bad thing. He's just maybe kind of commenting on it, like, boy, you're really something, kid. Interestingly, the officer who leads the gold cloaks in this scene sees Arya as a girl. So he's right. He's the only one that notices, besides, Yoren. Jaqen actually almost certainly notices as well, too. But he doesn't want to out her. He's respecting her disguise. She's showing her nature in front of a man who is far more than he seems, of course. Arya tells Gendry she's not afraid of any of the 3 of the men in the cage, and Gendry tells her she's stupid. They even scare him, which in itself is a clue. That's supposed to tell us something. It's not, this moment isn't just about Arya showing how brave she is, and Gendry being the foil to that, being, look, everyone should be afraid of these guys. It's not bravery to not be afraid of these guys. It's thoughtlessness. But all the while, Jaqen H'ghar, a guy who is smaller and quieter and, kind of unassuming at this point, for some reason, these nasty, violent men are leaving him alone. And now, so that's a clue, right? I don't mean that we're not supposed to know that he's a faceless man. We're not supposed to know he's a face-changing assassin by this point. Although there's a small clue. The closest we get here is, quote,
"Something about the way he talked reminded her of Syrio. It was the same, yet different, too."
Yeah, and with the world-building knowledge we knew then, well, maybe we don't know where Lorath and Braavos are in relation to each other. We know Sirio's from Braavos, and we know Jaqen is from Lorath, but we don't know where Lorath and Braavos are. So maybe they're similar to each other. And there is a passage earlier in A Game of Thrones that compares a lot of the free cities' ways of speaking to each other, which is kind of meant to be, well, that's what it sounds like to somebody who doesn't know better. But still, at this point, and I mean at this point in the books, I don't mean in 2019, I mean one can't be blamed for thinking Syrio is Jaqen at this point. Given that line, if you read that line, if you're a first-time reader and you're like, And later you find out that Jaqen can change his face. Yeah, there was a reason Syrio equals Jaqen was a popular theory for so long, because it was kind of set up. But later events show that, I don't think so. So we're supposed to realize that he's dangerous, not just because he was in the Black Cells, not because he's compared to Syrio, but because Rorge and Biter are scary and they seem to be afraid of him, or at least to leave him alone. And I mean, Biter is half animal. All mean, all cruel. He doesn't really think, but he's still afraid of Jaqen for some reason. They haven't even touched him, as far as we can tell. So that's interesting. So they're bigger and meaner looking, and there's two of them, but they leave him alone. And that's kind of a little bit of a minor bit of foreshadowing there, because Arya herself will eventually be the smaller one that everyone else is afraid of. So Arya, here's some notes from Joe. Arya is kind of defending the wolves in conversation to people saying, oh, the wolves this, wolves that. And she's kind of arguing that the wolves aren't like that. But this is sort of a sideways way for George to bring up the concept of just because they're Robb's men doesn't mean they're good people. You know, being sworn to Robb doesn't make you a good person, just like wearing a crown doesn't make you a better person. All these things, the small folk suffer either way, Joe points out, which is true. It's that same line that Jorah says. The small folk suffer when High Lords play their Game of Thrones. I guess Varys says that, but Jorah says the one, the small folk pray for rain and a good harvest, and that they'll be left alone. Similar, it's the same line basically, stated differently. So these are very important concepts for someone Arya's age who has had a, sheltered, not sheltered necessarily, but I guess sheltered's fair. She hasn't been sheltered in recent times, but most of her upbringing has been removed from the plight of the common people. And of course it's been removed from things like war. There had been a war during her lifetime. Pretty cool that Joe points out that it's kind of neat that Yoren ignores the order, the paper sword from Cersei, kind of in the same way Cersei ignored Ned's paper shield. That's cool. I did not catch that. I like that. Now, of course, Cersei's paper sword returns with real swords, and it does get Yoren into trouble. But yeah, same for Ned. He got into trouble for ignoring Cersei's ripping up of his paper shield. Yes, back and forth, back and forth. John O'Donnell from Facebook wonders how it could be that only one person tried to kill Yoren. It's like, really? Only one person tried to kill Yoren over all the years? All these criminals who have see their life kind of going in one direction and having, little else to do, like kind of like the deserters from the Night's Watch. Like, well, there's if anyone catches me, I'm dead. Going to the wall. Well, if they can take out Yoren, at least they can live free for a little while longer. Yeah, I can kind of see it, but I can see John's point too, where that maybe only one is over 30 years is a bit light. But
I'm interested in John's second point. What would Rorge and Biter have done on the wall?
Yeah,
because it makes me wonder if there's ever times when the person, for example, Yoren collecting criminals to bring them back up, ever had to be like, we got to get rid of this person. Yeah. Like if there's ever been a person that was like, they made the call that this person was too dangerous to let loose on the wall.
Yeah, you wonder about that. They just would have to, I guess they just get executed.
Yeah, that's what I would, I don't know if they get executed before even getting sent to the wall or if they just make that decision.
I think I meant they would make that decision after. They would try to rehabilitate them and then be like, all right, there's no...
Because I don't picture Rorge and Biter being set free on the wall.
Especially Biter. I mean, he's half animal. Rorge, I could kind of see, having no choice, and him being a man with he's an awful guy, but he has his wits intact.
Yeah, I mean,
you can kind of understand that if he doesn't obey, he's going to die. Biter may not get that. Biter may not understand. He may not have that capacity. Nina points out a parallel here that Bran is starting to get used to summer and being inside Summer, while Arya is worried Nymeria won't even recognize her. But, of course, Nymeria will. Okay, that's it for Arya 2. Let's go to Jon 1. The gang hunts for maps, aka the one where Jeor compares Jon to Aemon. There's themes of duty, kingship, character, and ancient things. Like every chapter in the early going, the rise of magic is present. The comet is there to remind us of it. And here we go. Quote.
Sam? Jon called softly.
And he finds him reading, which, we love that.
Have you been here all night?
Have I? Sam looked startled.
You didn't break your fast with us, and your and your bed hadn't been slept in. Ras suggested that maybe Sam had deserted, but Jon never believed it. Desertion required its own sort of courage, and Sam had little enough of that.
Is it morning? Down here, there's no way to know. Being in a room with no electricity, no windows, just ancient books, that's a rarity in our world. But the idea that I could lose myself in books and forget the world around me for 12 hours or so, it sounds wonderful, but also kind of fanciful. Like, where am I gonna have 12 hours without, where I can just not pay attention to the world? We all would love to have that from time to time, probably. But if I were in Sam's place, it may not be so fanciful. There's they have their duties on the wall, but they have times where they get to kind of escape and do their own thing. And apparently Sam can be gone that long without too much going wrong. Maester Aemon must not have needed him, or if he did, suffer, Aemon. So we get a bit of an explanation as to how these books can still exist after thousands of years. I mean, thousands of years, they should have fallen apart. We kind of get a sense of how much they're falling apart. Sam points out that once they get old, they get recopied. So they kind of get refreshed in that sense. He says 100 times probably some of them have been recopied, which is just astonishing. That's so long. But he also points out that they're falling behind on that work because there aren't enough people to copy the books. And that means that some will permanently be lost to age, most likely. And, we'll get some of this again when Sam does battle with a mouse. Back here in this library, in A Feast for Crows, Sam is protective of the books. As much as Jon shows no interest in these books and a disdain for what's in them, he does at least show some care by blowing out his candle. Jon would be wary of starting fires, given that he did burn the Lord Commander's tower when killing the White. Now, that was understandable, but burning the library, that would not be understandable. Now, while I agree with Sam that you can indeed learn things from lists of food inventories, I wish Jon had picked up just any of the other cool books lying around. Like, here's a list, or here's a quote that gives you the examples of books he could have picked up instead.
I found drawings of the faces in the trees and a book about the tongue of the children of the forest. Works that even the Citadel doesn't have. Scrolls from old Valyria. Counts of the seasons written by maesters dead 1,000 years. Man, those are so cool.
Right? That's so cool. Like, come on, show us the drawings of the faces in the trees. A book about the tongue of the children. Come on, that's so cool. Scrolls from old Valyria. Now, we know that the works that even the Citadel doesn't have, that comes up again because, well, that is... those are some of the ones that get taken to the Citadel when he goes there with Aemon and Gilly. In fact, that is a particular reason he takes some of those books. Because, yes. And so Sam does his job. He gets the maps. They have, older maps, but they're maps. They point out that, the villages may change, but the rivers and forests will be pretty much the same. The mountains especially. So they're prepared, but the mission itself, it's kind of questionable. I've seen some people in the fandom call it a suicide mission. I don't think it's quite that bad, but even some of the Rangers and other people going seem to feel some of the fear associated with it, and for good reason. Quote,
"We're all scared. We'd be fools if we weren't. Too many Rangers had been lost the past 2 years. Even Benjen Stark, Jon's uncle. They had found 2 of his uncle's men in the wood, slain, but the corpses had risen in the chill of night. Jon's burnt fingers twitched as he remembered. He still saw the White in his dreams, dead Othor with the burning blue eyes and the cold black hands, but that was the last thing Sam needed to be reminded of. There's no shame in fear, my father told me. What matters now is how we face it. Come, I'll help you gather up the maps.
So, something that I didn't put in my notes that I just caught right while Ashea was reading that question. It's neat to see that Jon got the same lesson in fear that Bran got in Bran's first chapter in A Game of Thrones. The whole, there's no shame in fear. My father told me what matters is how we face it. That's really cool. So I guess Ned gave that lesson to all of his, well, at least his sons. Hopefully he gave it to his daughters as well, but who knows. Heading beyond the wall with such a small group might not be a great idea. It's probably not a great idea even without the undead menace, but the haunted forest is extra haunted right now. I mean, even just the wildlings are dangerous enough, but now they've got others to face and Walking Dead. So, yeah, I don't know about this, Jeor Mormont, but here's a quote talking about the brothers needing all the help they can get.
The Black Brothers have dubbed the Wanderer Mormont's Torch, saying, only half in jest, that the gods must have sent it to light the old man's way through the haunted forest. Yep.
Now, Mormont complains that Thorin Smallwood is calling him too old to lead this ranging, though, throughout the journey, I never see anything that makes Jeor look like he's slowing people down. He seems to be doing just fine, but he definitely hates being called old. He hates being reminded of his age, and that is interesting. So yeah, the problem is the mission itself, not the fitness of the guy leading it. It's a bit funny to see Jon acting like he's an old vet. He's talking to Donal Noy, and they're looking at this new batch of recruits from Gulltown, and he says, they smell of summer. But he smiles and says that they'll do, because, he did. He was raw one day, smelling of summer, and he and Sam, they've adjusted. One of the new men is Satin. He's not called that, but we know it's him. Satin is later Jon's squire when Jon is Lord Commander. He's described here as a foppish youth in soiled satin. So there you go. That's him. There are also two blonde twins whose names are not given, but we know their names are Aeron and Emric. Jon later trains against them in A Dance with Dragons when he's Lord Commander again. And the aptly named Hop Robin, a man with a club foot who is being trained as a fighter only because they're desperate for men. Normally, a guy with a leg like that would be a steward or a builder. Probably a steward. As they consider what kind of men these desperate ones will become, they also consider men on the entire opposite end of the spectrum, meaning kings. George uses very specific language here for Jon's dialogue.
Robb will make a good king, he said, loyally.
Will he now? The smith eyed him frankly. I hope that's so, boy, but once I might have said the same of Robert. I love that it said he said loyally. It's very George having a more tongue-in-cheek comment there. It's very much describing that Jon isn't saying that with love or duty, or he's not saying it with love. He's saying it with duty in mind. He does love Robb, but he doesn't love that Robb is a king. And Donald's getting that out of him, and so does Jeor. I do that all the time, calling Jeor Jorah. It's such a crime when I do that. It bothers him, and Jeor wants him to admit it, that Robb will be king while Jon is on the wall. Jeor gets that confession out of him. Jon says, yeah, it's troubling, but I'll keep my vows. Speaking of vows, also in this chapter, Jon claims, I took a vow when his brothers head off to Molestown to dig for buried treasure. He who just broke a vow to run off, and he who will break many more vows before it's over, including this particular one with Ygritte. For good reason, but still, this feels more like commentary on the difficulty, if not the absurdity, of vows, especially when vows overlap each other. Jaime, of course, is one of the ones who most bitterly talks about this issue, but it touches on so many different characters. Ned and Jon and so many others. So this by itself might be a minor parallel to Aemon. And of course, there's a lot of Aemon-Jon parallels. I'm not saying it's a minor parallel, but this particular one, maybe even their real names they have in common. But you could at least say that Aemon did want to break his vows as he was ending his life, or as his life was ending. He didn't end his own life. And by that, I mean, he didn't want to go to the Citadel. When they were on the ship going to Bravo, they stopped in Bravos for a while, but once Aemon got all fired up about Dany and realized that she's the princess that was promised, he wanted to go to her. He was like, I must go to her. He's like, he'd basically been like, screw the Citadel. He was ready to just break Jon's orders and head off to Dany. He just couldn't because of, he's 102. So I think that's really interesting. That's something I hadn't really thought about until this time. Donal Noy also has a lot to say about the nature of power. It's not framed that way. He talks about it in terms of the nature of people, like what kind of person you are and how power changes you. But that is what this conversation is about. And what I mean is that he says the crown changed Robert, and that's why he's not so sure about Robb, which, it just so happens that Robb is named after Robert. So, So that leads up to this extremely powerful, familiar, standout, seminal line from this book. Quote,
Robert was the true steel. Stannis is pure iron, black and hard and strong. Yes, but brittle, the way iron gets. He'll break before he bends. And Renly, that one, he's copper, bright and shiny, pretty to look at, but not worth all that much at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And also,
I think along with Sansa's, porcelain ivory quote, this is one of the other most quoted things, and they're both about like materials.
Yeah, comparing people to metal or other materials, like you said, like porcelain. So that's really neat because we're supposed to think about how this applies to Jon. So we'll come back to this. I've got a couple of notes at the end here that are more specific to this point. But let's move on just for now. Perhaps Sam's Macially future is also being extra foreshadowed here, not because of the different metals, although that is, maybe something you could point to as well. But Sam talks about how much he hates stairs, which is kind of like a show of solidarity for Crescent, who, just a few chapters ago was really struggling with those stairs. So Jon responds with a line that I find pretty noteworthy here.
Well, that's one thing we won't face in the wood. When they entered the solar, the ravens spied them at once. Snow! The bird shrieked.
Face in the wood, not the woods. Face in the wood. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but when the next line is Mormont's raven referring to Jon by name, I'm thinking George R. R. Martin is dropping Blood Raven's presence here. Face in the wood, the trees, he's looking through the trees, etc. Yeah, maybe. So here's another exchange that we must speak to, however. Quote,
Thorn has the White's hand to show them. A grisly, pale thing with black fingers it was, that twitched and stirred in its jar as if it were still alive.
Would that we had another hand to send to Renly.
Tywin says you can find anything beyond the wall.
Aye, Tywin says. And the last time he went ranging, he says he saw a bear 15 feet tall. Mormont snorted. My sister is said to have taken a bear for her lover. I'd believe that before I'd believe one 15 feet tall. Though in a world where the dead come walking... Even so, a man must believe his eyes. I have seen the dead walk. I've not seen any giant bears. Well, we who have seen the show. 15 feet is so unbelievable, is it? Well... Varamir's snow bear is 13 feet tall. I don't know if 2 feet is that much of a stretch. It's only 2 feet more. Now let's combine these ideas, right? A dead bear that we saw on TV and a huge bear. And a bear is going to attack them at the fist during a Storm of Swords early on. So there is going to be an undead bear in the book. It's much different circumstances than the undead bear in the show, but still, it's an undead bear. So maybe that's a parallel to the one we saw on TV. And that might be, or might not be rather, the only TV tie-in here. Now, the TV White Hunt was weird. But we don't know whether they made that up or whether George had something vaguely like it, or maybe even more like it than we think. Or nothing at all. Maybe they just made that up entirely. But we do know that the show skipped the plot of Alliser Thorne going to King's Landing with a hand. So... maybe that was them circling back and resolving that plot line. The point being that there's some sort of plot that they bring proof south to show that there really are undead in the north. Now, of course, it went nowhere in the books. Tyrion keeps Alliser Thorne waiting for so long that the hand rots away and there is no longer any proof. So, And of course, it didn't really work in the show either. They got Cersei to believe that the dead were real, but she still didn't help. At least Jaime came, right? Something. As for the idea of having another dead hand to send to Renly, that's also brought up here. And, well, someone else is sending him a shadow. Don't worry. So I'm not a Renly fan, but I kind of do think he might have sent men north. He had a lot of men, and he wanted to be liked, and, doing something generous like that, showing that he wants to protect the whole realm is, seems like the kind of thing he would do, maybe for cynical reasons, but still. And it would have been neat if he had done that, because then he could have Stannis taking his whole army north and kind of, well, Renly sends men north, I'll go there myself. But alas, that was a road not traveled. The trend of discussing kings in this chapter continues. It's not just about, what kind of metal is Robert and Stannis and Renly. Jeor goes into a fuller explanation of Maester Aemon's history and the circumstances that led to him being a candidate for the crown. Of course, in this story are references to uncertain Targaryen parentage, wink wink, and a man who took the black rather than being king, wink wink. Aemon said, "I don't want it," when it was offered, and he gave good reasons, but there was some insistence. Just like there was for Jon on the show, and there might be in the books. There probably will be. The High Septon even offered to remove Aemon, or offered to absolve him of his oath to the Maester, to the Citadel. And so Aemon kind of doubled down, was like, well, I'm going to take a second oath to remove myself from the line of succession. I'm going to take the black. I'm going to be a Maester and a brother of the Night's Watch. Now, part of the reason people wanted Aemon is that they didn't want the alternatives. A babe of Aryan was one option, and Aryan was mad, and this is a baby we're talking about, so there's two reasons not to want that kid. And the other one, the other main candidate was Egg. And, well, they didn't want Egg because he was so close with commoners. Now, that's not really the thing with Dany, but Dany is an unpopular choice, as the show reveals, including the worry of madness, which is the thing for Aryan's kid. So it's kind of like Dany is sort of covering both the bases here with Aryan and Egg, meaning that a lot of people don't want her as king or queen, and a lot of people are worried about her mental fitness. Now, the truth of those things is irrelevant. We're talking about perspectives. So again, I'm not commenting on what Dany actually is or will be. We're talking about how people perceive her. And that's, of course, hugely important, especially today when we're talking about men believe power lies where it lies. The reality of Dany, the reality of Aemon, the reality of Jon are not the same as the beliefs about them. And that is part of what Varys was getting at with his shadow on the wall talk. Hugely important. So if we take the idea that many would prefer Jon to Bran or Dany, and if Jon knows this, he's going to have to do the same kind of things that Aemon did. He'd have to remove himself as a threat to his brother, or his foster brother. So that's where this really strong parallel to Aemon comes in, is that I wrote in my notes here, strong parallel in Aemon removing himself from the line of succession because he'd be a threat to his egg. Don't crack that egg. It's very fragile. So yeah, I meant to say to his brother.
Just like me saying his Cersei.
Yeah, exactly. So let's come all the way back to this chapter. We've jumped all over the place, talked about endgame stuff, talked about Bran, talked about foreshadowing, talked about Jon as king, talked about Jon as Aemon, and it all comes back to this moment here again. So here we go. Quote.
Mormont stroked the raven under the beak with a finger, but all the while his eyes never left Jon Snow. It made him feel odd. My lord, why have you told me this about Maester Aemon?
Sure. We are missing some details and reveals, but we know why Mormont is bringing it up. Jon's already run off once for one. He's like, remember where this conversation goes. He's like, now that your brother is king, what are you going to do? And Jon says, well, I'll be troubled and keep my vows. So that's part of what Jeor is getting at, is making sure Jon isn't going to break his vows again. But he's also it's also meant for us, the reader, to be thinking of Jon's parentage, or if we're rereading, to be like, oh, that's what this was all about. Because the first time we read it, we probably didn't know exactly what was going on. Maybe something in the back of our head was like, something's going on here. And George even makes Jon feel that way. It's in that quote I just read, it says, it made him feel odd. My lord, why have you told me this about Maester Aemon? So there's a lot of subtext there.
I will say, if anyone stared at me, their eyes never leaving me while they stroked their raven, I might feel a little odd.
Okay, fair point. There's more to it than just the subtext. There's also just the straight up, why is he doing that? That is creepy, man. Stop that. So we know how this next bit applies to Bran's eventual rule and how Jon will see his own duty to the situation, and it will be similar. This is Jeor again describing what happened, and keep Jon in mind as you hear this. Quote,
Aemon knew, and rightly, that if he remained at court, those who disliked his brother's rule would seek to use him. So he came to the wall, and here he has remained, while his brother and his brother's son and his son each reigned and died in turn until Jaime Lannister put an end to the line of the Dragon Kings.
If Jeor were to add one more and his son to that list, it'd have been Jon. So that was kind of funny. That's a good little nod. Another little hidden joke by George there. Now this is why I gave the spoiler warning about the show. Well, this one isn't actually spoilery. Point being, I knew I would be talking about the show extra much today. But in season 1 of the show, I think it was actually a good choice for the show to add a Jon Jaime scene, because Jaime killed Jon's grandfather, and though it was morally correct, it was a crime one would expect to normally see the penalty being death or the wall for. So it's funny that the show was kind of doing it. They didn't emphasize this, they maybe could have made this more clear, but they had Jon where Jaime should be. And Jon, had his grandfather not been killed, would have been in Jaime's place, siring heirs for the throne. Not on the sly and not in the Kingsguard, but he'd have been, continuing his family's dynasty. So that was kind of clever by the show, I think. I don't even know if that's what they had in mind. For all I know, it was accidental cleverness, but I do appreciate that moment because they did have that connection, and it was never Jon and Jaime in the books. That's just there's nothing there, at least not yet. There's always a chance things will happen later. It's not too late, especially given that we know Jaime goes to the wall in the show, so maybe he'll do that, or not the wall, but to the north. So if he goes to the north in the books, then, or at least, finds himself in the same army with Jon, then there's a chance for some things to happen there. So like I said, there's been a ton of subtext in this chapter, and we are here for it. But we are not done with it. I think we know what's happening here. Maybe. Quote,
King, croaked the raven. The bird flapped across the solar to land on Mormont's shoulder. King, it said again, strutting back and forth. He likes that word, Jon said, smiling.
An easy word to say. An easy word to like.
King, the bird said again. I think he means for you to have a crown, my lord.
Mormont? No, you, Jon. But like Aemon, we expect you'll refuse it too. Well, not right away. Maybe. So we'll see. He'll have to take it, then he'll refuse it, then we'll see. Well, I can't wait to see, but we'll see. So the bird again just has so much to say. The bloody raven. This isn't the bloody raven, but it's blood raven, almost certainly, popping up all over the place before he's even been revealed. A couple of thoughts from Joe. He points out that this is not nearly the first tease of libraries. We got Tyrion in the Winterfell library here. In this book, we have Sam in the Castle Black library. In Storm of Swords, there's apparently no library porn. In A Feast for Crows, Sam back in the Castle Black library, and then eventually to the Citadel. And, in Dance with Dragons, we have the exact same chapter, or part of it, Jon, from his point of view. So that's not really different, but it's kind of the same place, but not the same place. All right, so a couple more questions and things from you guys. A lot of questions and comments from y'all in this chapter. A year after this book came out, this is a good time to remind y'all that the Hedge Knight came out, meaning Dunk and Egg 1. So we hear about a lot of the characters in that story when Jeor Mormont is giving the history of Aemon. And we even hear some of the events, such as, quote,
Aemon was at his books when the eldest of his uncles, the heir apparent, was slain in a tourney mishap. He left 2 sons, but they followed him to the grave not long after, during the great spring sickness.
Yeah, Baelor Breakspear, that's who he's talking about, was killed in a trial by 7 during, after a tourney. it was really a trial by combat. You know, the tourney was the main event, but this was a side thing after. His sons were Valar and Mataris, and they did die of the Great Spring Sickness, along with King Daeron II the Good, all around the same time. And this, by coincidence or not coincidence, also led to the ascension of Bloodraven as Hand, a position he held for about 24 years, 12 for this next king, Aerys I, 12 for the king after, Maekar, who is Aemon and Egg's father. So we used to think that the Aemon-Jon parallel, like people have been noticing this for a long time, of course. It used to be widely thought that, you know, Jon's going to step aside for Daenerys, which is still probably true. But, you know, he's maybe going to step aside again for Bran. That's the part that pretty much nobody saw coming. And so George just hit it under layers, as he does. Tree Girl from Flick says the book porn is even better than the food porn. It's the real buried treasure here. I would have to agree. Now, George does take more time with his food porn. He's more descriptive with it. But yeah, we want the book porn. The book porn is more interesting. Well said, Tree Girl. John Hagee says, Satin is from Old Town. What was he doing in a Gull Town dungeon? Good question. I don't know. Nina Friel gives an answer. I have a headcanon that Lynn Corbray brought Satin in and then got rid of him when he no longer wanted him. Hence why Satin comes from Gull Town. Huh. That's a pretty cool idea on Nina's part. And I don't have an answer. We don't know. Of course, there's plenty of reasons he could be there. You know, he's from Old Town, and, you know, maybe he just decided he would rather be in Gull Town. He just wanted to move there. Maybe his family moved him there. Maybe it could be this Lynn Corbray theory.
I like the Lynn Corbray theory. Well, I don't like it.
I don't
like that it happens. But I think it does have a certain amount of merit. It makes a certain amount of sense to me.
Yeah.
To have this connection between them. Not that I think it would ever be like I don't think Lynn Corbray is going to show up at the wall, and I don't think Satin's going to leave the wall. So
yeah, I agree. So speaking of the wall and Molestown, Leaf from Flick asks, is there money at the wall? The brothers aren't paid, so how does this work out? Now, this is a good question, and this is one where we can go directly to the source. George has answered this question. We've actually heard him answer this question live, but he's also answered it, you know, in the past. It's an entry in the So Spake Martin, so we'll just I'll just read directly from the So Spake Martin.
Yeah, and this question's from like 2000.
Yeah,
the year 2000. But here's the first half of his answer. A lot of the Molestown transactions are paid by barter, certainly, but there is coin at the wall. Not much, though, especially these days. Some coin comes north with the Highborn brothers, someone like Sir Waymore Royce, undoubtedly arrived well-heeled, and I imagine families send gifts and such as well, and there's trade that goes in and out of Eastwatch. He goes on to say, talking about, and this isn't a direct quote, but he talks about how the main support of the Watch has come from the gift. You know, Brandon's gift and the new gift. And in later years, the revenue from that has not been as large, but they still make some money and goods from it.
Yeah, and of course, there's also, right, like, you know, along the items of barter, I think that's the main one. Of course, Rangers will go out into the wild and occasionally find things of value as well and bring them back. And yeah, like he said, there's also trade, Eastwatch. There's a lot of little things. So yeah, they don't make their own money. They don't have coins that they make there or anything like that. But there's enough reason for coins to have made their way up there, and those go into circulation and so forth. So good question, and George has a good answer for it. Nina caught another one here. This is good. she says, she quoted this line here. It says, "The Lord Commander's place is at Castle Black, lording and commanding," he told Mormont, ignoring the newcomers. "It seems to me." The raven flapped big black wings. "Me, me, me." So this is Thorin Smallwood telling Jeor Mormont that he shouldn't lead the ranging, and the raven flapping its big black wings saying, "Me, me, me." Well, if we continue to imagine that that's Bloodraven, well, lording and commanding, it seems to me, Bloodraven would be the could maybe have never stopped thinking of himself as Lord Commander. Technically, he never died. Why? He's still Lord Commander. He could arguably is still Lord Commander. So he's saying, "Me, me, me. I'm Lord Commander." That's cool. I like that catch. Very clever. The Raven is just endless with the references you can find with that guy. We've never done a deep dive on the Raven. We've done a deep dive on Bloodraven, and we mentioned that the Raven is very Bloodraven-y, and we gave several examples. But we did not go through every single example of the Raven talking, because that would be a whole episode by itself. Just analyzing Mormont's Raven alone could be 2 hours of analysis easy. So I'm glad that we're catching them one by one here as we do Valar Rereadis, because yeah, it would have been too much to put them all in that episode. So many people loving how awesome Donal Noy is. He continues to be great. They love his conversation with Jon here. They love how he talks. They love his attitude. A lot of people also wondering about Endru Tarth. He's the new Master at Arms for the Wall, and meaning, of course, the thing they wonder is what's his relationship to Brienne. Now, we don't know. We know that he's not her brother, and he's probably not an uncle, but he could be an uncle. He's probably a cousin. We don't even know how old Endru Tarth is, so it's difficult to say. Endru Tarth is also later going to die, if I remember correctly. I forget where. I think he dies. Actually, no, I do remember. I think he dies on the Bridge of Skulls to the Weeper's attack. The same battle that Bowen Marsh gets badly injured in. So, great catch by Esther McGriff on Facebook on the thread for this chapter. She points out that right after this chapter is Catelyn 1, and that's right when we get Robb's crown, which, of course, it's bronze and iron, metal, the types of metal. So that is the kind of king that Robb is, apparently. He's iron, which makes sense. He's kind of like Stannis, that he's maybe a little too proud to admit mistakes, a little kind of keeps going and does what he thinks is right, regardless of what other people tell him. Renly is described as copper, and Robert is steel. Now, bronze is copper mixed with tin, so I don't know what Donal Noy would say about bronze, but yeah, it's something. There's something here. So we wonder to ourselves, too, since he's having this conversation with Jon and there's all this overarching thoughts of Jon being king and all that. That's such a big part of this. So what kind of metal is Jon? That's for you guys to decide. In the chat and to yourself as you're listening to this, if you're catching the replay or watching the live stream later. Yeah. What kind of metal is Jon? Is he Valyrian steel? Is that the most appropriate type of metal for him?
Stainless steel.
Stainless steel.
Do you think someone could be aluminum? Titanium?
Titanium. Ooh, that's a good one. And then, yeah, so, and ask that question for other characters. What kind of metal is Fagon? What kind of metal is Dany? What kind of metal is Bran? You know? There's a lot of that in this story, too, because of the concept
Dany's
of
gotta
Maester's
be
Slinks.
Danny's got to be something very resistant to heat.
Oh, good call.
You know,
yeah.
like really, really high melting point, like
Yeah.
a tungsten or something. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that would be titanium. Yeah. That's cool.
Does titanium have a really, really high melting point?
I think
Anyways,
so.
this
It's
is our new
like
podcast about metals and what we don't know about them.
I'm pretty sure it does because it's used for it's like a lot of the ships in Star Trek are made out of they have some titanium in them. They have some.
Because we all know
metal
Star
that they've
Trek
made
is
up.
exactly accurate to
A
science.
lot of science nerds making Star Trek, y'all.
Yeah.
They know their metals. No, I actually don't know. I just know titanium is really tough and resistant. So I assume it's heat resistant, but maybe it's not. It can take all kinds of punishment, but put a match under it and it just melts. And that is it for Bran 1. Let us move on to Catelyn 1. Let's do that. Did I say Bran 1? I meant to say Jon.
Oh.
Jon 1, yes. Catelyn 1, here we go. The one where Robb sends Theon home, a.k.a. the gang gets bad news about the Riverlands. Cat is full of dread and blaming herself for Ned's death. the North and Riverlands are excited about King Robb, but she takes a more nuanced view of her son's sudden rise to power. Quote,
her son's crown was fresh from the forge, and it seemed to Catelyn Stark that the weight of it pressed heavy on Robb's head.
a heavy crown, a heavy metaphor, but perfect for the situation. It tells us exactly what we need to know. And since this chapter comes just after Jon's, in which kingship is discussed quite a bit, in particular, Donald Noyes takes about how a good warrior doesn't necessarily make a good king. A lot of the other king discussions are about, Aemon's stuff and alluding to Jon, rather than discussing character. And this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about character. What kind of man you are and how that crown changes you, which is already happening for Robb. And sure enough, Catelyn insists Robb not let Theon go to the Iron Islands to keep him as a hostage and send someone else. That someone else would be, gee, Balon, why do you have so many ships ready? And he could say they were for Robb. Now, for Robb meaning to attack Robb. And, he could say for Robb, I'm going to have them help Robb. But he really means to have them attack Robb. But instead of listening to his mother, and by extension his father, who was also adamant about not letting Theon go, Robb, after a very brief exchange, does this, quote,
I'm sending Theon. Good day, mother. Grey Wind, come. Robb walked off briskly, the direwolf padding beside him. Catelyn could only watch him go, her son, and now her king.
Cat didn't have time to bring up that Ned felt strongly about this too, or to make any other points at all. I've seen people in the fandom sort of criticize Cat for not being more adamant about this point, but what was she going to do? Like, he had made up his mind and he walked off. I mean, so that shows how much he's changed in a short period of time. A lot has changed in a short period of time. At the end of A Game of Thrones, things were going great for the Riverlands North Kingdom. We talked about how unusual it was from a writing perspective to have the quote-unquote bad guy Lannisters be losing at that point. But off-page, in between books, things are going good for the Lannisters again, relatively speaking. Partly because Tywin is so ruthless and cruel that he's, starving the Riverlands, shredding people. And that's a big part of this chapter, is hearing about all the devastation his men have unleashed on the Riverlands by his order. And while he sits there at Harrenhal eating all the crops that were being saved for winter. Now, of course, that's going to have long-term repercussions as well, but we'll talk about that some other time. So in this short period of time, Robb was worried that Cat would send him home. Now he's just giving her, telling her how it is and walking off. Not long ago, some of the lords were calling Robb Green, but now they're calling him King. It's a big change in a short time. Not only has the war changed and the outlook changed, but Robb has changed. Now, Robb, we're talking about how the crown changes people. It changes people in different ways. Robb, sometimes it makes people better. Sometimes. Robb is maybe better in some ways. We're not seeing it here, though. And now, to be fair, he's not lazy like Robert Baratheon. He's not wantonly cruel like Joffrey. He's not vindictive like Balon. He's not proud like Stannis. He is maybe proud, but not like Stannis. And he's not ambitious like Renly. Nevertheless, the crown does affect him, and this chapter is full of Cat's thoughts on how Robb is changing. That stubbornness is one of the first examples of it. He's listening less and taking his own counsel more. Now, so using Robb as an example, it's interesting to consider this line of thinking as it applies to other kings and queens. Who else is going to let it get to their head? Maybe young Fagon will. Maybe Dany will. Yeah.
I kind of see it as Robb having this strong feeling of separation, which you get into when we're talking about the idea of Robb, having his own wolf dreams and all that, that he would just be feeling different, more and more different than his peers, than how he should be at that age.
Yeah, he would be kind of isolated, maybe a little bit lonely, and that speaks to part of why he
was
jumped for Jaime.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah, that's a great catch there by you, because that does even make Robb's perspective more clear and just shows just how hard this must be. Like, we saw it a little bit when he broke down in front of Catelyn when people were gone. He's like, I know, Mom, this is really hard. I'm blah 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 blah. That Robb still exists, even though this Robb has put up more of a shield, more of a wall. He's got more of a front.
Yeah, it's lonely to be the king.
Yeah.
Especially, he doesn't have any of his siblings. He grew up in such a Full household.
Yeah, and that is exactly what we were just talking about with Bran, about how Bran is feeling lonely. He's in charge. He's, in charge of the crossing game. He's the Stark in Winterfell, but he's very much lonely. Even with his brother there, he feels lonely because his brother's running off to play with the Walders, and he's sitting there being serious and having to be responsible when he just wants to be a little kid, which is kind of similar for Robb. So that's really good. That's a really good tragic bit of parallel. Much later, Robb is going to despair that he made a mistake in this scene, that he should have traded Jaime for Sansa after all, as ridiculous as it seemed at the time. They're making it out to be ridiculous at this time. They're like, it's insane to trade. And so do the Lannisters. Adam Marbrand is like, he'd have to be an utter ass to trade Jaime Lannister for 2 girls. But that's not true. What Robb later realizes is that if he gets Sansa, well, Sansa by herself isn't going to help the war effort directly, but he takes her and marries her to Robert Arryn, and then all of a sudden the Vale is on their side? Well, that's huge. But apparently no one else thought of that until later when Robb is like, man, I should have done that. So for now, the idea of gaming Jaime up at all is out of the question. And part of that is because of Rickard Karstark. He's trying to keep his vassals, well, this one vassal in particular, in line. And as we see, well, he's not going to stay in line. Along the lines of what Ashay and I were just talking about with regards to Robb being lonely, something else to consider about Robb is what level is his warging getting to? Grey Wind's presence is fairly prominent in this chapter. He's noted to be with Robb, matching his moods, kind of just with him constantly. So the idea that Robb could be feeling even more isolated or confused or powerful because he realizes he has this extra power no one else has. And it doesn't have to be an either or. He can feel lonely and powerful, which I suspect that's a feeling that Bran will really grow into even more. He's going to get even more powerful and even more lonely. Same goes for Dany. And so in this idea that he's got these fledgling warg abilities that he has no ability to understand. And like you said, as well, he has no one to talk to about it. Bran at least has someone to talk to, but he gets to talk to Nan, he gets to talk to Osha, he gets to talk to Lewin. Even though Lewin is downplaying it, at least he has someone to talk to about it. Robb can't even bring it up. Robb never, that we see, ever touches on that. He never talks to Catelyn about it or to anyone that we know of. So all these things speak to the many reasons that George might have in mind when he says that he somewhat regrets not making Robb a POV. Because all these things that we've talked about really foreshadow things that are going to happen to other leaders. Robb is the test case for so many other plot lines. He sets up so much. A king with supernatural powers ruling over a new kingdom. A young man, ahead of getting more responsibility than he's ready for. How he deals with that in his own head, so we just don't see that because we're not in his head. So there's a lot of parallels there that, George could have given us. It's not like we don't have plenty of parallels already. I'm not complaining, but you can see why this would have been pretty fertile ground. We also see Cleos Frey beginning the back and forth traveling between Riverrun and King's Landing that will eventually result in his death while traveling with Brienne and Jaime. He takes Robb's terms to Cersei, then brings terms back from them, and when he comes back, some of the people that come with him are in disguise as soldiers, but they're actually dudes who are trying to break Jaime out of prison, but of course they fail. Blackfish says his men are calling the comet the Red Messenger, which is interesting because that's the same thing Varys reports it being called in King's Landing. Now, Riverrun is not super far from King's Landing, but it isn't exactly close either. So I think that's interesting that the same nickname is being given, fairly, with a couple weeks ride apart. You wonder where the name originated or whether it's just kind of a natural thing to call it, but I think that's interesting. Blackfish also points out that you can see the comet by day now, which Sam had just said in the last chapter. So these things, it's one of the rare times where we have this natural central thing happening that allows us to time when these chapters are happening. So rarely are we able to place chapters to kind of tell how close these chapters are happening to each other throughout the series. But the comet kind of changes the game temporarily. There's some minor, subtle character Tully family building here. That's a sentence that doesn't make much sense. Minor, subtle character Tully family building here. With Hoster dying, Cat and Brendan talk about how he's saying things that don't make a lot of sense. He's got, dementia or something like that. It's a bit of a setup for him talking about the Tansy tea much later. I believe that's in the Storm of Swords. He tricks Lysa into taking that, and it's Cat's like, Tansy? What's that all about? And that is, of course, a parallel to what Sybil Spicer is going to do to her daughter Jane Westerling to keep her from getting pregnant with Robb Stark's child. But, of course, that's later. But this is setting that up, or at least alluding to that. In the now, we are reminded that Brendan and Hoster still have a deep bond despite their long-standing quarrel. That's nice to know. And we are reminded that Cat didn't know her mother very well because she died young. Brendan says to Cat that she looks a bit like her. And, well, Cat, had she known her mother better, she might know that, and she might know her mother's house better, which is House Went, which is the next thing they discuss when the conversation turns to the war. Not House Went, but the House Went's former castle, which is Harrenhal. Blackfish says Tywin wants to lure them, meaning the Riverlands army, Robb's army rather, to Harrenhal, which is the seat of House Went. Well, it was. They lose it to Tywin and won't ever get it back, most likely. The Wents are basically extinct now. So, Blackfish says, don't give Tywin what he wants. Don't meet him in the field. Don't attack him in a spot that's hard to attack. So, this is the beginning of the formation of the plans we see later when they decide to, hey, well, you're going to sit here and expect us to attack you? Well, we're going to go attack you. We're going to go attack the West. So, they do the opposite of what Tywin wants. And of course, things go out of whack because of the Battle of the Stone Mill and Edmure preventing Tywin from getting back to the West, but we'll get to that when we get to that. A couple of thoughts from Joe. Quote, war had made a man of him before his time. Yeah, it's not just the crown, but the war. That's an important distinction as well. It's not just that he's a young man that's been elected king or nominated king or whatever you want to call it, agreed upon. He's been in battles, and that's, not normally something you see from someone his age. So this book is the end of the Green Boys and Knights of Summer, Joe says. Of course, we're going to see some more of them when we get down to Renly's camp, but they won't be Knights of Summer very long because they're going to start seeing battles too. And a lot of these flights of fancy are going to be long gone by the time the swords cross. So Robb doesn't like wearing the crown. Perhaps because it's not the real crown of the North, perhaps because meaning not the one that the North surrendered so long ago, or perhaps because he just doesn't, he's feeling the weight of it metaphorically. Joe says something very good here. Being crowned is great. Wearing it is different. Yeah. Robb was very proud to accept the crown, but he's learning the difficulty of actually being a king. So, let's see here. I took note of when Catelyn was suggesting who else would be better to go treat with Balon Greyjoy. The names she names are Jason Mallister, Tytos Blackwood, and Stevron Frey. So that tells us something about Jason Mallister, Tytos Blackwood, and Stevron Frey, that she thinks them capable diplomats. We already saw Stevron be very proper and noble and kind of and friendly and courteous and all that. So you can see why she picked him. Tytos Blackwood, we don't know a whole lot about yet. We learn more about him later, and he does fit this mold. He's very courteous to Jaime when he's surrendering in A Dance with Dragons. And Jason Mallister, we don't see a lot of him, but his reputation is for being an honorable guy. So you kind of see that. That's interesting. But good little sneaky moment by George by throwing those names in there. Stefan B. on Flick points out that Robb, when arguing with Catelyn, says that Theon saved Bran, even though at the time he, lambasted Theon for being so risky about it. So he's kind of, you wonder if he over time changed his mind or if he was just blurting out a reason to justify his bad choice of Theon. Nina points out that Theon is noted to smile when he hears that Jaime will be kept as a hostage. Perhaps a bit of Schadenfreude there, right? Theon knows what it's like to be kept as a hostage for a long time. It's one of the very few things I can feel sorry for Theon about. Robb's crown Nina also points out that Robb's crown is a bit similar to Maekar's, and Maekar was kind of maybe not a warlike isn't maybe not the best way to describe him, but the crown is kind of warlike, and he was certainly not shy about fighting, getting into wars and all that. But he didn't start any that we know of.
And he also wasn't very long for the world. Well, a lot longer than Robb, but
Yeah.
once
About 12 years, I think it was. Yeah. A medium length reign, I guess. So yeah, that's and he also is gonna face issues with his with the succession. After Maekar's death, there was issues, and after Robb's death, there's gonna be issues with where his crown goes. So that is a nice parallel too. And our last chapter for the day is Tyrion 2. The gang sends Slynt to the wall, aka the one where Varys answers his riddle. It's a thematically rich chapter, super rich, most of it, or much of it, related to the same riddle that we already started discussing, i.e. the nature of power. It touches on all levels of power, meaning the most powerful of all, kings, to a good example of a life with no power or agency at all, the baby of a sex worker. So really the full spectrum is explored here in this chapter of power, and who wields it and how. So all this while showing us that power is often a matter of perception, like he says, of shadows. But it's also a matter of swords, or shadows with swords, in the case of shadow babies. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. We'll start off with this one, a quote, the first line of the chapter.
Janos Slynt was a butcher's son, and he laughed like a man chopping meat.
And in a sense, he was chopping meat. By suggesting Al-Ardim, baby murderer, to take his place as Lord Commander of the Gold Cloaks, Slynt is basically giving Tyrion a list of men he thinks to be a good choice to replace him, but it's basically a list of who Tyrion should get rid of. So it's a list of who the meat is and who needs to be chopped. Since Al-Ardim, since one of the reasons Slynt chose this list of men is that Al-Ardim is amoral, meaning he'll do anything. You want someone, Slynt says, you want someone amoral who will do whatever you want. Well, that's not what Tyrion wants. So, again, Slynt was basically just telling Tyrion who to get rid of. Yeah. +1 to really get rid of, meaning throw Al-Ardim overboard. He's meat for the fishes. And in another sense, he himself, meaning Janos Slynt, is the meat. He was kind of chopping himself there. I mean, you have Jacelyn Bywater just sitting on the other side of a door, listening to Janos confess about all these things. He thinks he's telling Tyrion how clever he is, how all these things work, how great it is. But really, he's just incriminating himself. So there's a lot of reasons Janos Slynt had to go. And one of those reasons doesn't even come up here, which is that Tywin wanted him gone. That if Tywin wants you gone, that's bad news for you. So it was all made easier for Tyrion to do this job because he hates Janos, especially because Janos goes and talks down about sex workers, and Tyrion has a soft spot for sex workers. So that wasn't the best thing for Janos to say there. But the fact that so that makes it easier for Tyrion to get rid of Janos because he already hates the guy. He's like, well, my father hates him. I hate him. He's scummy. This is going to be... Tyrion he kind of takes pleasure in doing this. So if you're faced with a powerful person that hates you, and this person has shown a propensity for violence, and they ask about your children, well, that's scary. And that's exactly what happens. Tyrion does this. He mentions Janos' children right after bringing up his father, saying, I am, you know who I am. I'm, you know who my father is, blah, blah, blah. You know what house I belong to. Tywin is known for being unscrupulous with the lives of children. Yeah. So despite his fear of Tywin and what might be done to his children, Slynt manages to fire off some bluster about his own friends, quote unquote, like Cersei and Joffrey, and points out they won't stand for me to be sent to the wall. He's right. Cersei doesn't want Slynt gone for the same reason Slynt praises Al-Ardim. Tyrion doesn't want a sociopath who will do anything in that role, but Cersei actually does, and Joffrey does too. And Tyrion knows all this, so he can't allow Cersei or Joffrey to interfere. So In another display of power, he has Sir Jacelyn Bywater waiting to take Slynt away immediately. He has a sword. So do his men. I think I've quoted this line before, but it's a line from, I believe it's his line from, what's his face, the Roman general who fought Caesar, Pompey the Great. He said, you shouldn't quote laws to men with swords. And Slynt wasn't quoting the law, but he was basically pointing to a paper shield. And Tyrion knew about that paper shield and never allowed Slynt to arm himself with it. He never gave Slynt a chance to go run off and complain to Cersei and Joffrey. So take him to the wall right now before he has a chance to complain. That's a whole different other form of power. So Janos' titles and friends mean nothing in that moment. He's powerless to stop his fate, which is the same fate he handed Ned Stark. Ned Stark, also a man with many friends. More friends than Slynt, more power than Slynt, more love than Slynt by a mile. But the point is, no matter who you are, none of that matters when you're surrounded by swords. If those friends are far off, if they're not in the room with you with their own swords, they can't do you any good. So, as for Sir Jacelyn himself, as we find out, Slynt is listing all these people he thinks would be a good replacement for Lord Commander of the Gold Cloaks, but that job's already taken by Sir Jacelyn. Tyrion was just letting Slynt talk, letting him chop more meat by admitting to things you're not supposed to admit to. Naming names. Although he didn't name Cersei. That's the one name he didn't name, even though that's the most obvious name of all. So Sir Jacelyn is referred to by Slynt. Tyrion says, well, what about Sir Jacelyn? Wouldn't he be a good replacement for you? And he's like, oh, that guy's too rigid, too honorable. He won't do anything, which is, that's why he doesn't like him. But if you're a decent person, those are good qualities for a City Watch commander, which, Cersei is not, meaning a decent person. Bywater does seem to prove quite capable, and, throughout the later chapters, he gives Tyrion good advice and blunt honesty, perhaps more importantly. And he has an iron hand. He lost it during the fighting during the Siege of Pike. Jaime, who was also there, meaning at the Siege of Pike, gets the idea for his golden hand by seeing this example of Sir Jacelyn, who was nicknamed Iron Hand. So Golden Hand has a predecessor. Bywater will later be killed in the Battle of the Blackwater, along with so many others, thanks to Cersei ordering Joffrey to hide in the Red Keep. So when the Gold Cloaks see Joffrey retreating, a bunch of them retreat too. Bywater tries to stop them and is killed in doing so. So Slynt, one of the only correct things Slynt tells Tyrion here is that you have to know your men. You have to know what they're capable of so you can know which jobs to give which people. Hey, that's true. That's a good point. But given that Sir Jacelyn died doing his duty and Slynt, took bribes doing his, well, I think you can see where Tyrion's coming from here. I think Tyrion gave the right job to the right person when he nominated Sir Jacelyn and gave him that power. In Slynt's case, when he says you got to know what they're capable of, what he means is, I knew Al-Ardim was capable and willing to kill a baby. And in fact, this guy is so bad, Al-Ardim, that he killed the mother too. And that's the thing that got Tyrion upset, because he's like, oh, sex worker got in his way. He was following a lawful order. That's what happens when you get in the way. How many times have we heard that in the real world? If you just obey orders, nothing bad will happen. So Slynt knew that Deem was the man for the job. And that goes both ways, because Cersei came to Janos Slynt to get this baby killed because she in turn knew that he was the right man for the job, meaning that he would know who could get this done. Hit jobs getting farmed out, basically. So Tyrion goes and asks Bran if he's capable of the same and finds out that yes, he is. It's only a matter of cost. And he kind of laments that, I guess I have 100 or more Alar Deems in my employ too. And it was probably the same for Deem himself, who probably got a promise of recommendation from Slynt. It was probably just like Bran was like, well, how much are you going to pay me? Deem was like, well, if you want me to do this, what am I going to get? I'm guessing the thing he got was this promise to recommend him for Slynt's job. He's like, do this job. Slynt's like, kill this baby, and I'll do my best to make sure you get my job. Well, That didn't work out so well. That really backfired. He instead got himself thrown off a boat. And of course, this is the thing that Tyrion laments. He's like, well, even if I get rid of Slynt, well, there's still Cersei, and I can't get rid of her. He's very upset that he can't do anything about that. It's another statement on the nature of power, that she's above punishment for this, even though Slynt was mostly above punishment for it, but it took someone like Tyrion, who's even more powerful, to punish him for it, and in a very sneaky way. So Slynt was almost above punishment too, but Cersei is completely above punishment right now, and that is, well, Varys comes back on stage to talk about the nature of power as if he never left. Here he comes, quote,
"A shadow on the wall," Varys murmured. "Yet shadows can kill. And ofttimes a very small man can cast a very large shadow."
Tyrion smiled. "Lord Varys, I am growing strangely fond of you. I may kill you yet, but I think I'd feel sad about it." Shadows can kill? Oh boy, ain't that the truth. We've got others referred to as shadows. Shadow babies are coming soon from Melisandre. We know they can kill. Patchface, well, he's not the only one talking about shadows these days. Although, you know, the context of this conversation is very different, but shadows can kill is true in all these contexts. Now, here's one that jumps out on only because of TV. When Tyrion says, "I may kill you yet, but I think I'd feel sad about it." That's exactly what happens on TV. I mean, Tyrion doesn't literally kill him, but he's the one that turns Varys over to Dany and reveals his, you know, treason. And he does feel bad about it. He feels very bad about it because he realizes that Varys was right. Now, Varys isn't going to be right in that sense on the books, I don't think, because it's a whole different ball game here with Fagon, young Griff, etc. But still, we could still have Tyrion giving Varys to Dany or something like that, or being the one to kill him in some way and feeling sad about it. So that line reads large.
Yeah, especially if you see a Varys with, you know, young Griff and that side of things, and Tyrion with Daenerys, you could see Tyrion and Varys coming in conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And a small man casting a large shadow, that one speaks for itself, showing Tyrion's importance to the rest of the story. Maybe alludes to the idea that Varys is considering bringing Tyrion on board to their side. As I said, I don't really think Varys had that idea this early, and as we see him kind of throw Tyrion under the bus later, only because of Jaime is Tyrion rescued. So, yeah, it's more that Tyrion is more of a temporary ally, most likely. But more importantly, a small man casting a large shadow, yes. yes. 10 times yes. So it's almost an interview. It's not like, as I said, even though Tyrion probably isn't considered an option for Varys and Illyrio's conspiracy yet, but he definitely wants to know what kind of man Tyrion is. Varys is trying to figure out what kind of person Tyrion is, get the measure of him, to use a phrase familiar to the series. But also, if we are considering the idea that Varys is maybe considering recruiting Tyrion at this point, if we look at why Tyrion would look like a good candidate for recruitment, a lot lines up. I mean, Tyrion's been pushed away by his family. His family doesn't really like him that much. But not all of them. You know, not everyone in his family feels this way. Jaime is still very much pro-Tyrion, but Cersei, Tywin, Varys might see that room to make that wedge bigger. So Tyrion is flawed and has a cruel streak and other issues, but he has a sense of decency, a sense of fairness, and he sticks up for the powerless and doesn't use power for gain too much. These are all things that I think Varys would at least find respectable. If not meaning those are traits he can work with. He's like, well, you know, I can work with you because you have similar values, even though I'm going to eventually probably have you killed. You know, there's a lot we can do in the meantime. And of course, Tyrion's also intelligent, great at talking and winning followers, despite being reviled, which is interesting because he never seeks to use power to make his own image better. He rules through fear, very much like Tyrion, or very much like his father. Not like Tywin does, but with a similar attitude, thinking that Tywin rules through fear because he thinks it's best. Tyrion does it because of the same reason we see Dany do it in the show, which is that she wants to be loved, but once that's lost to her, she's like, well, if I can't have love, I'm going to have fear. Tyrion doesn't think that love is ever possible for him. That's why he reminds himself that Shae is only there because of his money. He doesn't think of himself as lovable. It's a big part of who he is. So he never even considers that possibility. He's like, well, he doesn't expect them to look at him so cynically either. It's kind of two sides to the same coin here, but he also never expects him to be loved. So he kind of goes straight to fear. He's like, well, they may as well be have fear and respect of me. So those are qualities, intelligence, being good at talking and winning followers, despite being reviled. Varys has all those as well. He's intelligent, great at talking, and somehow Varys wins followers despite everyone being creeped out and hated by him. But of course, those same qualities are going to endear him to Dany as well. And here we go with another Varys quote speaking to all this.
Varys smiled. Some say knowledge is power. Some tell us that all power comes from the gods. Others say it derives from law. Yet that day on the steps of Baelor's Sept, our godly High Septon and the lawful Queen Regent, and your ever so knowledgeable servant, were as powerless as any cobbler or cooper in the crowd. Who truly killed Eddard Stark, do you think? Joffrey, who gave the command? Ser Ilyn Payne, who swung the sword? Or another?
So here he's using another example similar to the riddle itself, while also pointing out that someone suggested the whole thing to Joffrey, which most likely means Littlefinger. So with the foreknowledge of the Phagon plot, Varys' riddle takes on quite a different meaning. That's what I really want to focus on. I think the riddle's been discussed a lot in the fandom, and we've discussed it quite a lot, but today there's a lot more we could say about it, but I want to focus on what we know now. We could see the various ways Varys is manipulating the perception of young Griff. They want to make him look like a hero. They are really playing puppet master with the shadows on the wall, if shadow, using the same shadow metaphor that he uses for this riddle. They're engineering an invasion. They're engineering civil strife to have their guy come in and save everyone from it, to come in and fix it, to be the one that rescues them all. They want to make young Griff look like a king who understands the plight of the common man. Someone who knows what it's like to be scared, to be chased, and all the other stuff Varys tells Kevin just after he emerges from the shadows. Fitting, right? This is all a trick of shadows in the first place. Rhaegar's son is himself most likely a shade. It's not even the real Rhaegar's son, most likely. So, but they have a huge arsenal, meaning Varys and Illyrio, to make the world think otherwise. First, you have the easy ones, the people who want to believe. You have just the fact that he looks like Rhaegar's son, calls himself Rhaegar's son, and does heroic things is going to be enough for a lot of people. For the rest, well, you got symbols. Those are huge for winning legitimacy. And you could say they change the shape of the shadows on the wall. They're part of the puppet master's arsenal. We could see young Griff with Blackfyre, for example. That could happen. We could see him with the crown of Aegon the Conqueror. We could see him with a Dane at his side, like his father Rhaegar had. Seeing young Griff with Darkstar Gerald Dane wielding Dawn at his side, which is entirely possible, will remind people of Rhaegar having Arthur Dane at his side.
John Connington right there.
Yeah, and you have John Connington. You're right. That was one of Rhaegar's friends, just flat out saying, "Hey, this is Rhaegar's son." And of course he's not in on the lie. He believes the lie. So, yeah, perfect to bring up John Connington there. Yeah. So even the skeptical people might be swayed when they have the symbols, the acclaim, the heroism, and the people who knew Rhaegar saying that this is Rhaegar's son. So let's go back though to the brutal parallel of Tyrion realizing that Bronn is probably just as bad as Alar Dîm. There is a difference here, though. Bronn is a good example of someone who is less terrible because of the fact that he's working for Tyrion, a boss who won't give him the dirtiest of jobs. Now, Tyrion gives Bronn some dirty jobs, but he's not going to give him go kill a baby type jobs. So Bronn's potential for evil is mitigated because the guy giving him orders isn't going to order him to do the kinds of things that, say, Tywin will order his followers to do. Tywin will order the worst. Cersei will order the worst. So, in other words, if Bronn were to work for Tywin or for Cersei, He would do those bad things because he's capable as a human being of doing them. It's just a matter of someone telling him to. And now, Bran on his own, which is where he's at now, he's Sir Bran of the Blackwater, Sir Bran Stokeworth. Maybe he's calling himself Lord Stokeworth. Bran quite possibly will do awful things in that position as well. Well, he has done some kind of awful things, but not baby killing awful, certainly. So this conundrum gets deeper. Not for Tyrion, but for someone like Varys, who claims to be doing good, claims to be thinking about the realm. But he's about to inflict 10,000 bronze on the realm. And I mean 10,000 sellswords in the Golden Company. That's 10,000 Alardeans. Sure, there's probably a few good guys in there. There's probably several non-baby killers in that group. But however good Varys thinks he's fashioned his young king, however upright and moral he thinks he's made this guy, it's an army of bronze that are coming to put him on the throne. And those bronze are going to be given land and titles for their reward, which gives them a lot more leeway to be bronze. So if Varys thinks he's building a better king with a better kingdom, I don't think so. I do not think so. Yeah. But also, this Phagon plot is really showing the culmination of Varys as the anti-Melisandre. Reviewing the chapters the way we are this time is really driving that point home for me. How they're very similar, yet very much the opposite. Mel is flashy. Varys is understated. Mel is magical. Varys is anti-magic. Mel openly declares, loudly declares, Stannis is Azor Ahai, Lightbringer, blah, blah, blah. She's loud, vocal, and straight with her, with her talk. She's unwilling to compromise and or dissemble. Varys works behind the scenes, whispering. Mel has this unwavering message, and Varys will say different things to different people. Melisandre says that power flows in part from the trappings of power. Something we love to talk about with characters like Euron, but here it's Varys, and that's why Varys eschews the trappings of power. It's he understands this as well as Melisandre, maybe even better, and that's why he does the opposite. He lives a Spartan lifestyle. It's why he keeps no obvious wealth of his own. He wears the trappings of not power. He's trying to seem as unpowerful as possible while actually being very powerful. It's why he wears powder and perfume and slippers and acts dramatic about his feelings. And, oh, I cut my finger. Oh, my God. The key word is act, right? He didn't care that his finger was slightly cut. It hardly matters at all. He doesn't care that Tyrion insults him. He's just trying to act non-threatening, and he's really, really good about it. And Mel is glamored, while Varys is a mummer.
And I think it's really interesting when you think about what you were talking about with Varys, potentially bringing 10,000 Golden Company sellswords, whereas Melisandre, as we see in the show, sacrifices her life to try to save 10,000 Dothraki, or
That's true. Or to save humanity, or just to win the war. Yeah,
just in general, the idea that she would do that. Whereas Varys is unleashing some sort of chaos onto Westeros.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Melisandre talks about how she keeps guards with her, even though she doesn't need them, because it makes her look powerful. Varys, in this chapter, or actually it's the previous chapter, he shows up at the end of the Broken Anvil and points out how dangerous it is for people to be walking the streets at night, but he had no guards with him. He's like, I'm not worried. I have my own secret passageways and things like that. So Varys loves to emphasize how weak he is, how he has no army, no sellswords, not even a valiant brother. He doesn't even, let alone care having guards with him. He doesn't carry a dagger or weapon of any kind. So he's telling the truth, but he really leans into it. He wants to be as unthreatening as possible. So really a bunch of awesome opposites from Varys and Melisandre, who are very similar in a lot of ways at the same time.
Varys says he doesn't keep any weapons on him, right?
Yeah.
That's because he is the weepon. His body is a finely tuned killing machine. One day we'll see him rip off the robes and he's jacked and he just...
Varys is actually a ninja.
Yes.
So And like Melisandre, he can have people who think they are safe killed. He can emerge from a secret passage to kill like a shadow, but unlike Mel, not unlike Mel rather, but unlike Mel in that there's no magic involved. Just like Mel sends shadow babies, Varys emerges from the shadows to bash not Lewin, but Pycelle's brains in and shoot Kevin with a crossbow. So in a sense, Varys is saying that he's as powerful as a king in the shadows, but no more powerful than the baby of a sex worker when the swords come out. And again, he's not wrong. He's just really leaning into it. In his position, he can make and unmake kings and queens, but all it would take to end that, to end his abilities, is just someone coming at him with a blade or a one-way ticket to Dragonfire. Same difference. So really, this is why I said that this chapter competes with Bran 2 or Bran 1 in this book or in this episode for being super important, super powerful. I love that Varys also manages to do in this chapter the thing that has kept people like Cersei and Tywin and Robert and Aerys from lopping his head off. He proves his value. He reports some whispers. Varys mentions that the captain of a ship called White Hart plans to defect to Stannis. That's pretty huge. Just like that, Varys has kept a ship that would have been an enemy on their side. So that's extremely valuable. So let's just right there, Varys is showing his worth. Tyrion is like, yeah, well, I don't want to live without that knowledge. I don't want to get rid of this guy who would be telling me that. We need that. And that's the same reason like Robert and Cersei and Aerys, as much as they may not trust Varys, they rely on that kind of information. As long as Varys, like he says, I need to keep feeding them information to be valuable. If I if I lie to Cersei, she can't trust me anymore, then I can't do this anymore. Then it takes away my ability to be valuable. And if I take away my ability to be valuable, I'm dead meat. I may as well be, on the chopping block for Janos Slynt. So it's a really, really interesting, deep, complex issue that George plays with in a lot of ways that we could just go on forever about it. But we won't. Another perspective on this, though, the White Hart. Let's talk about that ship and that captain. The new captain of the ship, poor guy, right? He's like, well, I just want to change sides because, I think Stannis is better and Joffrey and Cersei stink. And what ends up happening?
He's the OG Stannis stan.
Yeah.
Stannis the Manus, he says.
And what? So this captain is almost certainly executed for treason. So the new captain of the White Hart is in no better space, though. He goes into battle with Joffrey, not literally with Joffrey, for Joffrey. And of course, we know what happens to Joffrey's navy. It's sitting there to be like a token force. It's basically set to be a decoy to lure in Davos and Imry's fleet to unleash the wildfire. So I got to say, that dude trying to switch sides, good call. It didn't work out for him, but he wasn't really risking anything because, well, the new captain of the White Hart found death on the Blackwater. In fact, the White Hart is the ship that comes into close quarters with Davos's ship, Black Betha, white on black. White Hart, Black Betha. They board each other. I believe it's the White Hart that boards the Black Betha, or maybe it's the other way around. Doesn't matter. Captain of the White Hart screwed no matter what he does. So at the same time, though, we get an example of Varys doing what I said he can't do too much of. He can't outright lie, but he can exaggerate, and he does it from time to time for his own reasons. In this case, he mentions Balon Swan's jest about three kings. Now, he's trying to, bring up treasonous table talk, and Tyrion says, I'm not interested in that. I don't care. But we can kind of see what Varys is doing here. Varys is the one who wanted to get rid of Barristan. Varys is the one who suggested that they replace Barristan with Sandor. And the prevailing wisdom here is that Varys wanted the Iron Throne's Kingsguard to be weak and corrupt and disreputable and to be nothing like the past Kingsguards where, they are well regarded and honorable for, standing up for their king. So Varys loves the idea of a Kingsguard with Mandon Moore and Jaime Lannister and Sandor Clegane, something that people will not look on as honorable. Balon Swan is a good guy. He's honorable and a good fighter. He's a good with the bow. He comes in second in the archery contest in the tournament to Anguy the Archer. And eventually he is chosen for the Kingsguard and does a decent job from what we can tell. But so I'm thinking here, Varys was trying to kind of poison Balon's resume so that they wouldn't put him on the Kingsguard, because Varys doesn't want Joffrey to have a good Kingsguard. But of course, as I said, they did pick him for the Kingsguard after the riots when Preston Greenfield is killed. Which, speaking of the riots, that might be related to Varys. Let's talk about that at the same time as talking about the comet. So Varys, another whisper that he gives Tyrion is that so-called holy men are preaching doom thanks to the comet. Quote,
"They are spreading fear, my lord."
I thought that was your job. And this is another time where Varys is like, oh, how rude. Oh my God, I can't believe you'd say something like that.
Rude.
Yeah, like, puts his hand over his mouth, like, oh, and this is this Varys trying to be, oh, I would never hurt anyone. If we believe Varys helped trigger the riots, which is a maybe, I lean towards yes, or inflamed Aerys' paranoia, which is a definite yes, I don't think there's any doubt about that, then that shoe does fit. Tyrion nails it. He's like, I thought that was your job. Yeah, it is his job. So Varys is like, oh, he's like, I can't believe you'd say something so mean, but also so true. So Joe Buckley points out that Tyrion knows quite well who he's dealing with when he talks to Slynt, something Ned did not get a good handle on. Ned, not as good at reading people as Tyrion, and not as good at, not that he's bad at it. I think it would be an overstatement to say Ned was bad at that. But he doesn't have this sort of penchant for intrigue. He doesn't know how to make, he would never see Ned coming up with a ruse like this to get Slynt to admit his own mistakes. Ned would do this sort of thing out in the open, like he did with Tywin. He was like, I accuse Tywin, Gregor Clegane must be brought to justice. That's what Ned does. This is Tyrion doing things behind the scenes. Very much right off the bat, we see Tyrion in the same position as Ned doing things the exact opposite way. Tyrion comes into the city. Tyrion comes in and is like, to Cersei, he's like, yeah, of course, I'll tell you everything I'm going to do. Whereas Ned is like, no, I'm in charge. He's not dissembling where he should dissemble probably. And just in general, Joe points out how important it is to take control of the City Watch. They're really important. I mean, that's 6,000 men or so. And Tyrion points out that Joffrey wanted to use them as an army. He wanted to lead them against Renly or something like that, which is insane. But it's not insane that 6,000 men with weapons are a force to be reckoned with. That is still true. Lots of, maybe not lots, but several comments from y'all and a few other miscellaneous ideas from myself here. Interesting that the ship Tyrion put Slynt on to head to the wall lists Skagos as one of its destinations prior to Eastwatch. I don't really have anything to say about that other than I noted it as interesting. Oh, so yeah, stopping at Skagos. That's not normally it's not a frequent destination for ship captains, but I guess it's a little more common than in the older days when no one would go to Skagos at all. I love that Tyrion symbolically strips Janos of his title and house as he's literally stripping him of title and house. What I mean is that, remember that Tyrion asks Janos to see his ugly enameled spear pin, and which Slynt reluctantly hands it to him. Well, Tyrion looks at it, it's like, yeah, I don't, it's a little gauche for me, and he tosses it aside. That pin was holding Slynt's cape up, and it just slips off of him and falls off. So his cloak comes off of him. So it's like he's being undressed and stripped of his power, that's what I mean by the symbolic stripping, because his clothes are coming off and he's about to head to the wall to take the black. And his cloak is cloth of gold, so it's really quite a standout garment. And otherwise, Slynt is dressed mostly in black, so it's very fitting that he's heading to take the black as he's losing the gold.
It's not one of George's subtler moments, I'd say.
No, it's right there with the crown being heavy on Robb's head. It's not like George isn't trying to be subtle. He's like, the crown is heavy. You're like, oh, heavy metaphor. I was like, your cape is slowly falling off you. Your wealth and your power is slowly. And then Slynt, Bywater steps on the cloak as he's arresting Slynt. So it's kind of adding to the metaphor. So normally the kind of thing we really try to figure out is these small side characters. We look at who the other men that John and Donald Noy were talking about who were recruited. They're not mentioned by name, yet we know all but one of their names, by looking ahead. In this case, we know that Al-Ardim is thrown overboard, but 5 other men are sent to the wall with Slynt, but we don't know who those other 5 are. They were probably in his little gang at the Watch, almost certainly, but I don't have names for them, and I don't think we get names for them later, but I might be wrong, so I'm throwing this out there just in case one of y'all knows something I don't. Go ahead and share it with us. So, here's something slightly tragic. It may be that Cersei did not know about Bara, meaning the girl that Al-Ardim murdered. Or Bara's baby, I guess it was. Ned actually mentioned Bara in Cersei's presence when arguing with Robert right after he woke up from breaking his leg. And he's like, remember, they accused him of, he was returning drunk from a brothel. And he's like, I was going to see your kid, Robert. And that may not should have said that, Ned, because Cersei might not have known about that kid. So, because Varys wouldn't have told her. Varys, as we know, Varys was kind of protecting those babies. For whatever reason, we don't know. It might be more than just hiding heirs. But we've covered that already. But the point is, Varys wouldn't have told Cersei about that. And Robert wouldn't have either. So Ned may have accidentally given the game away there. Oops, that's a little mini tragedy. And that's really sad, too, because here's another thing. This is where Ned and Tyrion have something in common. We know Ned is just so anti-baby killing. So finding out what happened with Bara's kid in the brothel, and Tyrion, wanting...
Real quick, I wanted to correct you before. Bara is the baby.
Bara is the baby.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like Baratheon.
Oh, yeah, of course. You're
Yeah.
right. You're
Anyways,
right. Yeah, you're right. The mother's not mentioned. The mother's name isn't mentioned. I got it backwards. You're right.
It's standard. Nameless mother,
Yeah. That's true. It is standard. I got that backwards. Okay, anyway, I've been saying that all episode. Oh, well, small thing. The points are all the same. No points change because of that. So, yeah, that's a really interesting thing. So Ned would be just as angry about this whole thing, if he found, maybe even more angry, and he would have handled it differently from Tyrion, but he would have wanted to do the same thing. He would have want Slynt sent to the wall and all these other things. But he would have maybe not gotten his wish because he wouldn't have handled it the way Tyrion did. And Tyrion probably couldn't have done it any other way. Because otherwise Cersei or Joffrey steps in and says, nope, I want to keep Slynt here. Just like Tywin stepped in to say, no, you're not dismissing Pycelle. We're keeping Pycelle here. One last point. On TV, instead of Sir Jaqen, we get Bran getting the City Watch Lord Commander job, which is a function of the law of conservation of actors, but not very realistic. I mean...
More realistic than him getting Highgarden.
Yes, more realistic than him getting Highgarden. It just doesn't really make sense to appoint someone from outside. I mean, it has happened. For example, Daemon Targaryen, the guy who gave them the name Gold Cloaks and kind of reformed the office and the job and gave them uniforms. But that's a rare thing. It's rare to have an outsider appointed over a military job like that. It's not truly military, but civic enforcement. And usually they promote from within, people who know what they're doing.
It's kind of like if you picture cops as police officers, and they bring in whatever, an FBI agent.
Yeah, to be sheriff.
Yeah, whatever. That's not the perfect comparison, but you see.
Yeah, it's like that person might be very skilled at law enforcement, but they have no idea, like they have no experience with this place or with how police do their jobs or, the day-to-day things. So, yeah, Bran just immediately being City Watch Commander doesn't make a lot of sense. However, it does actually make the theme of cleaning up corrupt officials and replacing them with just as bad corrupt officials kind of hit a little harder, because he replaces Slynt with a good guy in the books, but in the show he replaces Slynt with someone just as bad. Now Bran isn't actually just as bad in the show, but because I don't know why. He just isn't. He probably should be, but Bran's just he doesn't have a lot of personality. He's just a joking badass. So I thought that was interesting that it if you think about this Alar theme of, amoral people in high positions, well, that is what Bran was on the show, being City Watch Lord Commander. Okay, that is it for this episode. This is one of the longest ones we've done. I didn't actually see that coming. This document isn't actually any longer than our normal ones, but it is pretty long.
Yeah,
It's
we're at like 2
30
hours,
pages.
45 minutes.
Yeah. So you could see already why I didn't want to do 7 chapters a week for Clash of Kings, longer chapters. We'll see how it goes next week. I think generally the first chapters are among the longest ones a lot of times because there's so much setup. And we have less to say about action and resolution than we do about foreshadowing and setup and parallels to later things. And because these early chapters lay out the rest of them. There's like an arc kind of underscored, expressed in some of these early chapters that isn't part of the later chapters. Or I could just be wrong and these will take just as long later. So anyway, I said there were 3 first chapters next week. There are. Also with them is Arya 3, the one where Arya sees wolves, a.k.a. the gang witnesses the bad news about the Riverlands.
Davos 1, the gang burns the gods, a.k.a. the one with Flightbringer.
That's F. Lightbringer, like Fagon.
Flightbringer.
Yeah. Flightbringer, yeah. Proudwing jokes, get in there. Theon 1, it will be after that, the one where Theon returns home, a.k.a. the Iron Gang prepares for war with the Wolf Gang.
Daenerys 1, the gang hits the Red Waste, a.k.a. the one with the City of Bones.
Jon 2, the gang visits White Tree, a.k.a. the one where all the wildlings are missing.
Arya 4, the one where Arya saves Jaqen, a.k.a. the gang kills Yoren.
Oh, stupid gang. Why are they killing Yoren? We like Yoren. Oh, well. Okay, well, thanks to everyone who attended. Thanks for all the comments and great questions. Thanks to the people who participated ahead of time on Flick and on Facebook and in sending us emails and commenting on the Patreon posts as well. You add a lot to our episodes. You catch things that we don't catch, and you give us great things to talk about that we hadn't considered.
Do you want to talk about our plan for next week?
I think so. We are probably going to return to just making these live streams public. This experiment of keeping them semi-private has worked out pretty well, but it's probably not necessary.
It was born of post Game of Thrones finale, wanting to avoid it all.
We didn't want to have 1 million people trying to come in and talk to us about the finale when we're trying to discuss book 1.
And that's died down now.
Yeah. And we don't want too many questions. We don't want the chat to be too crazy. But I don't think that's going to happen now. I think going full public will allow us to save a little bit of time and not having to spread the word in private so many places and share the link. We just have the link public. Makes it a little easier for us. So we'll save us a little time. But if you have reasons why you think we shouldn't do that, we are all ears. Otherwise, we'll try that out and see how it goes and keep it going if it works out. And if it doesn't, well, we can always go back to semi-private. But thanks to Ashea for wearing 1 million hats, helping with the quotes, and doing so much at once. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld for the maps, and to Kevin MacLeod for our new music. Thanks to Joey Townsend and Jesse Kowal for our older music. Thanks to our Bengineer for the editing. Thanks to Nina and the History of Westeros mods for adding so much to the discussion. And like I said, thanks to everybody on Flick and Facebook for the same.
I also wanted to give a thank you to our live studio audience, Rita.
Yay, Rita the Coppermane.
Who also... this is very nice. Sean proposed to Rita
Last night, yes,
Dancing
Sean of House Beard.
Yeah. So
our very own.
Sean is engaged.
Yay. So everybody, 3 cheers for Sean and Rita as we say goodbye this week. Goodbye this week.
And real quick, I'm sure Sean would want me to tell you, as the best engagement present ever, follow him on Twitter.
Yes, Dancing Sean on Twitter. Follow him and say congrats. Until next week, everybody, on behalf of Ashea and Rita as well, Valar Rereadis.